Right then, let's go.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2-on-1 Powerchair football podcast powered by MK Battery and episode 54. A huge thank you, as always, to MK Battery for their continued support of the podcast and every National League live stream across 25-26. Today, we are recapping Gameweek 5 of the 25-26 Slater and Gordon Premiership, the final weekend of the season, and what a way it was to bring the campaign to a close. From the title race at the top to the battles towards the bottom, it had absolutely everything and was the perfect way to cap off what has genuinely been one of the best Premiership seasons in recent memory. Of course, we have to start by congratulating Leeds, who have been crowned the champion, securing their first top flight title in the club's history. And we have to also confirm that Sevenoaks PFC will contest a Premiership playoff against Teesside Steel on Saturday, June the 6th. And GBG Knights and Muscle Warriors, fresh from their promotion last season, see immediate relegation in this. My name is Ryan Sipple, and joining me once again is Gregg Baxter. Gregg, how are you?
Hello, Ryan. Hello, everyone. I am very well, thank you. Delighted to be here to talk about what an incredible weekend that was for Powerchair football. Just like you say, arguably the race at the bottom got more exciting than the race at the top towards the end of the weekend. But there was loads of action, loads of drama, and lots for us to talk about. So strap in, everyone, 'cause I think this could be a long one.
I think it could be. We are also joined once again on the podcast by Mr. Charlie McLellan. Charlie, how are you? How did you find the weekend?
I'm good, thank you. It was fantastic. As you said, Greg, there's so much drama at both ends of the table. I think it's great that we have a National League that is so competitive that on the last day, really anything could happen. And split-second moments in games really sort of decided what the way that league table ended, which was great. I thought it was a really good weekend. I thought it was probably, in terms of entertainment value, up there with the best National League weekends of all time. Just out of sheer sort of quality and drama. And as you mentioned, Greg, as well, at the bottom of the table, Sevenoaks clawing themselves into that playoff of the last game of the season. Just everything surrounding that and the narrative surrounding that was like a Powerchair footballing fairy tale. And yeah, it was a brilliant, brilliant weekend.
Yeah, exactly that. And that is what this podcast is for, to unpack that in as much detail as possible. Just to Gregg's point about the potential length of this podcast, we understand that these podcasts aren't short. As recently as the episode 52 or 53, when we did the championship recap, it surpassed 3 hours, our longest podcast ever. I suspect that this one will follow suit. So I know the majority of our listeners stream on Spotify, which obviously gives you the functionality to go for chapters. So we break down team by team. So maybe a good way to navigate things if you're not on Spotify, to start listening there, because it makes it a little bit more manageable. But we do appreciate all the listeners, and the numbers at the moment are really encouraging, which is why we try to be as consistent as possible with recording them. A big thank you, as always, to Jeff Lewis for his stats and insights across the season. They make a huge difference, as I'm sure Charlie and Gregg will attest. And a massive congratulations as well. He surpassed 250 National League games as referee this weekend, becoming just the third to reach that milestone alongside Mark Kerrison and Paul Pearson. I think it's important to note from here on out for the podcast that we state that all views, opinions, and assessments are our own, and they do not represent those of the Wheelchair Football Association. So, right then, let's get into the recap of Game Week 5. As always, we'll be working our way from 12th up to the top, breaking down results, momentum, and what it all now means for the respective sides. In 12th, finishing bottom. Another incredibly challenging weekend for Muscle Warriors, and one that ultimately confirms their relegation from the Premiership to next season's Championship. It means they've now been relegated after just one season in the top flight for the second time, having experienced the same outcome in the 2015-16 season. And across those two spells, they have yet to register a win in a Premiership match, now extending to 46 fixtures without victory. That also marks a 23-game winless run. So it's the longest in the club's history, so it's fairly difficult. It actually started with a bit of promise, a 0-0 draw with Middlesbrough, and that's a result on the surface. It doesn't necessarily jump out at you, but when you consider how difficult Middlesbrough are to break down, how effective they've been in tight games across the season, it felt almost like a foundation, and momentum was potentially continuing from game week 4, but it was from that point onwards the weekend just slipped away. A 4-0 defeat to Villa Rockets, a narrow 1-0 loss to GBG Knights, which in the context of the table was a huge game, and then a 2-0 defeat to Sevenoaks to close things out. And when you look at those results collectively, it sums up their seasons in many ways, lacking the cutting edge to turn performance into points. And coming into the conversation, Gregg and I from game week 4, based on their game week 4 showing, we thought they could potentially close the gap on the teams above them, not just based on their own improvement, but because Sevenoaks and GBG Knights were still within reach. But ultimately, they just weren't able to capitalise on those opportunities. And instead, it's another weekend without a goal. And that has sadly been the defining theme across their entire campaign. Charlie, I'll bring you in first. Give me your assessments from Muscle Warriors, both in game week 5 and then maybe more overarching across the season.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I think it's crazy that it's such a tight league that they could go into game week 5 having not won a game all season. And there was a genuine route to them staying up this weekend. If, they got that point against Middlesbrough, they beat the other two teams down there with them, they might have had a chance. So I think that's really interesting and shows how competitive it is. But it was a case of fine margins at times for Muscles this season. There were games that I think they performed quite well in that they ultimately didn't get the rub of the green. You think about the West Brom game, I thought they deserved something out of that when they lost narrowly 2-1 in game week 4. Similarly to the Muscles game in game week 4. Looking at game week 5 as a whole, I think they'll be really disappointed with their performance in the GBG Knights game particularly. They never really got going in that one, and considering GBG Knights had just taken an absolute battering the evening before to Greenbank, and they were without Kai Shah, it was maybe a chance for them to capitalise on GBG Knights not being in the strongest place. But to be fair, a brilliant goal from Oscar Smedley undoes them late on, and you can't really complain when you can see ones like that, but not scoring again is a frustration for them. I think they're one of the clubs that will benefit from going down massively. Obviously, they're rebranding next season. There'll be Aspire Warriors from next season onwards. But being able to go down to the Championship, to be able to end that winless run, you'd expect them to get a win on the board in their first weekend of the Championship, definitely, to be able to get that good feeling back, and also to establish a sense of identity in the Championship so that when they come up to the Premiership, they have a clearer identity of what they're going to do, is I think going to be a real positive for them. So there's definitely a positive spin to their relegation. Ultimately, they'll be disappointed with themselves in moments this season. There were definitely points on the board that they've sort of left there, but were they within the worst 2 teams in the league this season? Probably, yeah. And ultimately, I think they didn't quite do enough in terms of recruitment in the summer and practicing the defensive element of the game in particular to really warrant staying up. And I don't think it's a squad that trains together a huge amount, which can't help as well. So when you throw all of that into the melting pot, you do sort of make it very difficult for yourself. So I thought they've tried their best across the season, and game week 5 was a real sort of sign of that. But in terms of quality and sort of grit in those tough, tight games down at the bottom, I don't think they quite showed enough this weekend to really stake a claim at survival at any point.
Gregg, you came out of game week 4 really encouraged by their performance against Teesside and said they had a bit of fight and there is potential with results going their way. And if they take those crucial wins over the likes of GB United and Sevenoaks, we could remarkably see this side escape, but it just wasn't what materialised across the weekend. Give me your assessments.
Yeah, I echo everything you've both said, really. We were so positive about them after game week 4 because they showed a little bit of something. They had a bit of fight, a bit of performance, a bit of tactical nous. There was something there for them to be encouraged by, and I think they'd have carried that on into the 0-0 draw with Middlesbrough, which is, first point on the door. Then you go, that's a bonus point almost. We take that momentum into the bigger games later on, and it just never materialized. I don't know what happened, but it just slipped away, didn't it? I think everything we've talked about across the season has just came to fruition. The lack of cohesion is obviously to do with the lack of training time together with the squad makeup. They just sometimes, for a lot of the time, just look like they're not singing from the same hymn sheet, looking somewhat devoid of ideas. Obviously, going forward, there was a real lack of threat a lot of the times. I just think I don't know what happened, to be honest, because I was really positive about them after game week 4. And you say, look, they could really give GBG United a really good game, especially without Kai Shah, as Charlie said. And it just never materialised because they couldn't break down the team even without Kai Shah in it, and didn't seem to realise the opportunity they had in front of them. Because you say that they win that game, that they go into that Sevenoaks game, all of a sudden their coattails are up. They've got a real chance of pulling off the greatest probably comeback we've ever seen in Premiership history. But I think for them, going down is probably a good thing, a blessing in disguise. They can rebuild, regroup, get a sense of what they want to achieve, have a good conversation with each other, and just put together a real foundation piece for coming back up with a stronger mentality. Well, not a stronger mentality, but a stronger sense of what we want to achieve and what we want to do, like a clearer sense of what our plan is, rather than what seemed to be sometimes, because of the lack of training time, people not being able to gel with one another as best they could on the court.
Yeah, I mean, the overwhelming feeling coming out the weekend for me is probably frustration. Having commentated 3 of their fixtures, the biggest issue wasn't effort, it was confidence. And that stems from training, from cohesion, from togetherness. It looked like a side that was constantly second guessing themselves. And at this level, we know that hesitation can be absolutely fatal. Now, to Charlie's point, there has been changes and shifts and news coming out of the club recently, which we won't necessarily get into here. And I question whether or not that, consciously or not, that uncertainty played a part, because what we saw was a group that just didn't fully believe in what they were doing in key moments. And when you're already up against it in this division, that can prove to be the difference. Now, I don't necessarily want to single players out, but I think it's fair that we do. And they would recognise the lack of level themselves. So Ricken Shah, Jacob Vickers, Hannah Hindley, they haven't been able to translate their championship form into the Premiership this season. Now, I fully appreciate the disparity between the Championship and the Premiership. It's a huge step up in terms of quality, speed, decision making. And we've spoken about that throughout the season. But even factoring that in, you would still expect to see more of that influence translate across 22 games. Last year, they were dominant in the Championship, controlling games, scoring goals. This year, across the entire campaign, we haven't seen that same level of influence once. Not once. 4 goals scored across the season. It's not enough. But more importantly, and it'll be the exact same when we come on to talk about GBG Knights, the style that brought them success in the Championship hasn't translated over either. And that's been the key issue. And watching them, the key consideration or the key flaw was the central player. We say it all the time, this game is won and lost in the middle. And more often than not, your most influential player needs to be there to dictate, to connect, to control. Across the weekend, whoever was deployed centrally just couldn't get the ball moving. I still don't know who Muscle Warriors' best central player is, which is probably part of the problem. And the frustration is they did create width. And to be fair, Dakota Hannum, Sean Donaher, Henry Barnard, they worked hard to provide that. So you're thinking there is potential opportunities there, but time and time again, from where I was sitting on the commentary, from the commentary area, I could see the angles, I could see the space, and all it needed was one clean, crisp connection, whether it was Jacob Vickers or Ricken Shah, to bypass that central pressure, and they're in. And it never happened. Whether it was the weight of pass, the timing, the decision, I don't know what it was that let them down on so many occasions. And it was very frustrating to watch. Now, the other major issue that has been consistent all season is the attacking wide roles and the wingers, because whilst they had width, they didn't have anticipation. And when you're a side under pressure, you're going to be spending long periods of the game defending. That is the reality. Until we get up to about 7th in the division, that's kind of how teams set up. So when those rare moments come, when you break away, and it may only be once or twice in a game, you have to be ready. And too often, whoever occupied them attacking wide positions, they didn't look set. They weren't anticipating early enough. The chair positioning was wrong. And then if and when the ball did arrive, they just weren't ready. And we say that the game is won and lost in the centre. Majority, the goals are scored by the attacking wide players. And they just weren't set. But then it goes back to what I said at the start, completely devoid of confidence, which ultimately affects everything they did. So overarching, what they achieved in the Championship last season was exceptional. So naturally this season will hurt. But I said it in game week 4, probably game week 3 even. Relegation benefits this side, as it does GBG Knights, as it could have potentially Sevenoaks. And it's a debate we've had continuously on this podcast, don't you think?
Yeah, for me, I think definitely relegation benefits this side. They need a refresh. They need a reset. They need to maybe get new players in, a couple of younger players to supplement the experience in the squad. If I'm being sort of constructive in terms of the defensive side, because Ryan, you've spoken about the attacking side, Hannah Hindley in goal has a very aggressive defensive style. When the ball comes into the box, she often flies out of goal. And in the Championship, that aggressive defending, when you're playing against players who are potentially less switched on all the time, less able to just manipulate their chair in an instant to work it off an angle, that aggressive style of defending can be very effective. And that's why they had such an incredible defensive record last season. This season, however, people read it and people understood it, and people realized, wow, if we play the ball into this channel, she's going to fly out of goal, and we can either pick the ball off her and work it round her. I saw plenty of goals this season scored by teams against the Muscle Warriors where it was like 2-on-1 on the goalkeeper or 2-on-1 on the middleman, and they were just tapped into an empty net because of that. And also 8 own goals this season for Muscle Warriors, joint highest in the league with GBG Knights. That's not great, when you're up against it and you need to try and keep teams out. The last thing you want to do is actually help them out by scoring into your own goal. And I think that is also a sense of the defensive positioning just wasn't there, and they were allowing themselves to be in angles where the ball was ricocheting off them into dangerous areas. They never really got that defensive setup. And I'm sure we'll talk about Sevenoaks later. But when you compare them to a Sevenoaks, every time the ball gets into the Sevenoaks half, instantly it's Kyle Alexander, it's James Mason on the top of the box, and those two wingers are in there and defending. We never saw that this season with Muscles. I don't think I saw that clear defensive shape once from them, actually, and that's disappointing. I think my overwhelming feeling about Muscle Warriors is excitement, because I think next season, with the refresh, being coached by John Boulding and co, they're going to be a hell of a team, and they're going to play really exciting football in the Championship. But I I think, yeah, it's indicative of just a lack of quality and a lack of tactical understanding, the amount of own goals and the amount of defensive sort of lapses there were in that Muscle Warriors backline, because really they were their own undoing this season as much as they were undone by people.
I think for me, Ryan, you said it. It's key to say this wasn't due to a lack of effort. We could see them trying a lot of the time. They clearly wanted to end the run that they were on. They know it obviously wasn't good enough a lot of the time this season, and it's just that confidence, like you say, it's so tough to keep going. And I think obviously they had that confidence a little bit after game week 4. Whether the uncertainty has kind of chipped away at that a little bit, I don't know. We'll never know. But it was just a lack of execution and a lack of quality in the decision making a lot of the time that just let them down and didn't show the best that they brought in for the Championship. My overwhelming feeling, if we're all going for overwhelming feelings regarding the team, is uncertainty at the minute. I don't know. I obviously there's obviously got this rebrand, and that will probably be good, but obviously we don't know who's going to be playing, what the whole situation is going to be around it. I don't know what it's going to mean for some of the players there and the club, but I'm excited to see what it can do for them. But at the minute, it just seems a little bit not uncertain, but it's obviously new, and there's obviously excitement that comes with that, but also risk and sort of unease with maybe some players and what their roles are going to be.
We're not in the business of speculation, but I can say, or we can probably collectively say, a lot of teams will be facing that uncertainty going into the summer. And I think it's very fair to say that a lot of players, teams, identities will shift in the summer. So it's probably worth saying that when we are talking about teams across this podcast, we are assuming that the squad makeups are fairly similar to next season. We'll talk about potential additions or departures. But I think until we are a few weeks out of the 26-27 season starting, it's the complete unknown. So we won't necessarily get into the speculation, but I do echo what you said. Just before we move on, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge Alan Murray. He's played a huge role in securing promotion for Muscle Warriors last season, an outstanding campaign that will always be part of that club's history. Over the last couple of years, he's been incredibly passionate, fully committed, a real driving force behind that group. Of course, with the changes coming to the group, Alan won't be part then of the group next season, but that takes nothing away from what he has achieved with the team. And on a personal note, I sincerely hope we continue to see him involved in the game, whether that's on the sidelines or continue to officiate, because people with that level of passion and care for the sport are incredibly valuable, as I'm sure you both would agree. But with Muscle Warriors going back into the Championship, there is a real opportunity to reset, to rebuild, to reconnect, regardless of what the side is named, looks like, or who is leading it. Next in the standings, we've got GBG Knights, another really difficult weekend and one that ultimately sees them finish 11th, taking that second automatic relegation spot. They started against a West Bromwich Albion side in excellent form before that heavy 14-0 defeat to Greenbank, the most emphatic scoreline we've seen in quite some time, and now the biggest loss in the club's history. Sunday did at least bring a bit of a response with a 1-0 win over Muscle Warriors, but a 3-0 defeat to Throstles meant it wasn't enough, with results elsewhere confirming their relegation. And when you look at the weekend as a whole, it just feels like one where everything that could go wrong potentially did go wrong, especially that Greenbank game. Not just the scoreline, but the red card to Kai Shah, the knock-on effect it had on confidence, and the fact they always knew Sunday would define their season. So going into those games with that level of disruption made things incredibly tough. The bigger picture with GBG Knights, they still have never survived a season in the top division, even in 23-24 when they finished in 10th and were relegated via the playoff. They actually picked up more points in that season than they did this time round. The win over Muscle Warriors, however, did at least end a 12-game winless run, their longest ever, but it also highlights the struggles in front of goal they've had, because it was their only goal across their final 14 league matches, which tells you everything about how difficult it's been for them going forward. And while they've consistently found a way against Muscle Warriors, now 11 wins against them, more than any other opponent, they just haven't been able to translate that into results elsewhere. And ultimately, that is what has cost them. Gregg, you first here. Give me your assessments on GBG Knights.
Yeah, I think the phrase "everything that could have gone wrong did" is absolutely perfect for GBG Knights this weekend. They obviously have been in that playoff spot all season pretty much, and were just almost reliant on two teams below them just having worse form. But obviously this weekend, as we'll get on to, we saw Sevenoaks pull together and produce a magical weekend that they just couldn't match. And I think we had this debate, didn't we, after Gameweek 4 of, does relegation suit them? And at the time, I disagreed with you and said that it doesn't. I found myself at times on commentary this weekend changing my mind, to be honest. I think it does. They showed glimpses in the Throttles game that I did of moves that we've not seen all season, and it only took a couple of wonder saves from Reg Kemp and Pathgak to stop the score being 1-1, and that would have been the point they needed to stay up. But we haven't seen any of it at all really this season. I was watching the first half and they just weren't really attacking at all. There was no attacking impetus whatsoever, which for a side last season that was scoring goals for fun, just is completely night and day. And I think they need that reset back in the Championship to get that confidence back up, get the players that they have playing the football that they were last season. Oscar Smedley showed what he could do with his finishing against Muscle Warriors. But again, it's one of those, we see it, a chance here, a goal every now and again, with one goal in the last 14. You're lucky if you don't stay up with that run of form. So they've got pieces. There are pieces there. They've got a core group, but they just lost their identity this season for me. And as they got on, they got less and lesser in the confidence department. And it just, I feel like relegation is actually a blessing in disguise. Just to go back on my word from Gameweek 4, completely right.
Yeah, where you absolutely shot me down when I said that relegation would be a positive, because I want to see these players having that confidence. Once again, Charlie, give me your assessments of GBG Knights.
For me, the moment I knew that they were going to go down was the second half of that Greenbank game. I was really disappointed with their performance with three players. Like, I know that playing against a good side with three players is tough, but when you look at game week 4, Sevenoaks played an entire game against Leeds with three players and lost 3-0 against Leeds, who were champions. GVG Knights, the way that they capitulated, I just thought they're done here. Like, they're done. To be fair, they pulled themselves off the canvas better than I was expecting. Winning against Muscle Warriors, I wouldn't have put them as favourites in that game. But yeah, I just think at the end of the day, they were relegated on goal difference. And if they'd maybe shown a little bit more of that sort of grit and determination and pride that I think Sevenoaks showed throughout the season, then they could have really managed the situation. And, so many of the goals they conceded were avoidable. You look at the West Brom game, and I know West Brom were brilliant this weekend, but they've lost 4-0. 3 of the goals are own goals. Like, there's that it was avoidable getting relegated on goal difference and stuff like it really did feel like in the Greenbank game in the second half they just completely down tools, which I don't think you can afford to do when you're in a relegation battle, especially if you're looking at the maths and you're knowing, right, there's a chance this goes down to goal difference. You can't afford to completely down tools, and some of the goals that they conceded, I wouldn't expect any team in either of the national leagues to concede. Like, some of them were so sloppy. I think I was very much on your side of the fence originally, Ryan, when you said that they could do with a relegation. But I don't know how they're going to refine that identity from last season. You look at the way that they've played this year, and it's like the players that was so good for them, like Oscar Smedley, an absolute goal assist magician, has had a year of his development basically hampered by having to sit on the goal line, which I don't like. And I think that's, not going to do them any favors. Like, are they going to return to the championship next season a better team than they left it? And they may be slightly sort of better at that last ditch goal line defending, but I don't know if in general as a unit they're going to be a better, more cohesive side this year as they were last time. And I don't know. I don't want to say that they've wasted their time in the Premiership, because that would be completely unfair. And at the end of the day, they were really close to staying up, or at least having a chance to stay up in the playoffs. But I don't know. I think this season we could have seen more from them in terms of an identity and in terms of a pride and sort of team cohesion that I just think was missing all season for them. And that's ultimately why they fell short at the last hurdle, because when it comes down to a final game week, relegation scrap games that are 6-pointers and games that you have to win, I think it's always going to come down to who wants it most, who really wants this. And ultimately, I don't think that team was GBG Knights this weekend.
It was another question of confidence, wasn't it? You could see the life drain out of them after that Greenbank game. And I echo your points completely, Charlie. I understand the circumstances and the context with Kai Shah's red card being such an important player. You cannot lose 14-0 in this division, even with 3 players. And I watched a far more inexperienced Sevenoaks side playing against a far more attacking side in Leeds and frustrate them, limit it to just 3. So without rubbing salt in the wound, I cannot accept a 14-0 scoreline. I'm sorry to say. But it's a frustrating one for me because I had high expectations for GBG Knights coming into this campaign. Even without winning the championship last season, it would be unanimously agreed they played the best football in the second division. The chemistry they had, the bravery in their approach, and it felt like that side could translate elements of their game into the Premiership. Now, again, I know the difference between the divisions. You can't play exactly the same way at this level. You do have to be more reactive, more defensive, particularly in the games against the top sides. But where I do think they're fallen short is the games against the teams around them, those between 6 and 12. And that's where I wanted to see more bravery, more willingness to impose themselves, more of that identity that got them promoted in the first place. And this is the exact advice I'm going to be giving to Manchester United next season, because just like GWG United, it's pretty much the same squad. And that may be part of the issue. Promotion doesn't guarantee survival. And I do think there's a wider lesson here that sides coming up need to strengthen in some way. You can't assume that your championship level will be enough. But the Greenbank game was catastrophic, and everything stemmed from there. Did you have something to say, Greg?
Yeah, the moment for me that sort of made me scratch my head and summed it up was in the Throstles game, obviously last game of the season, and they're 1-0 down. So when the first goal went in, you saw sort of their heads go down. But the moment for me was they obviously started with Oscar Smedley in the middle, as they usually do. And then in the second half, they swapped it round. And they put Kai Shah in the middle, Oscar Smedley on the wing for about 5 minutes, if that. And actually brought George Holloway on the other wing. Actually threatened and created a couple of really good goal scoring opportunities. Like I said, it took a couple of really good saves from Reg Kemp and Path Gackwood to keep it at the 1-0 scoreline that Throstles had. But then they switched it back immediately. And I was sat with David D on commentary, and we're scratching our heads. Because I'm like, you've just threatened and attacked and created a goal opportunity. Why are you reverting back when you need a goal?
You can go back to every episode recapping the respective game weeks in the Premiership, and we speak about the utilisation of Oscar Smedley. It baffles me. And it's not as if I haven't said this to the squad in person, but they're insistent that they are using him sporadically. They are using him in an attacking sense. But it's so frustrating to watch. And just on your point of George Holloway as another player, 14 goals, 32 goals, 14 assists last season. He didn't strike once this season. Oscar Smedley, ridiculous, 40-plus goal contributions. Did get 2 goals and assists, which did contribute to 6 points, which is fantastic. And to be honest, I'm far more lenient on Oscar than I will be his teammates, because this was his first ever taste of Premiership football, only his second ever National League season, with Jack Ewins, with George Holloway, with Kai Shah. They've played at this division before. They know the demands of it, so you have to expect a little bit more. There is a constant and consistent lack of connection between the defence and attack. And the side is so reliant on getting the ball into Jack Ewins and just asking him to dribble it up the court. And he's a very strong player at it. But if that is the mandate, if that is the instruction, knowing Oscar Smedley played the majority of minutes behind him, he's just going to be a spectator, if not asked to be that obstacle. So whilst you say it's stunted his development slightly, Charlie, or it's a wasted year, I don't necessarily see it like that. He's still incredibly young and has so much time to develop his game. You need to get this taste. You need to realise what the demands of this division are. And when we come to next season, when the likes of David D and Mason Davies are testing it, they're not going to have it their own way. But it's how you react to that, how you then either go back down, build again, build that confidence to right the wrongs if and when you next come back up to the Premiership. There's a lot of talking points. But again, to echo what I said after game week 4, they benefit from relegation massively. And this isn't mainstream sport. Relegation doesn't result in huge catastrophic finances being lost. It's all about confidence and playing with a smile on your face and enjoyment, because quality stems from that. And it's with Muscle Warriors, with GBG Knights, none of their players look like they're enjoying football. And when we come on to talk about Sevenoaks, after they got that point against Villa on Saturday morning, they were beaming. You could feel the energy coming off them. And I think that is what ultimately secured them safety. Not necessarily the quality of football or the point accumulation. The fact that they were together, They were enjoying themselves. It's a massive factor, don't you think?
I've always said, for me, if you're not enjoying your football, and I get it's difficult when you're losing games heavily and stuck towards the bottom of the table, but if you are not enjoying playing the sport, you're not doing it right. You need to be playing with a smile on your face, because obviously none of us are being paid heaps of money to play the sport. We're not sat here on professional Premier League player wages. We're obviously paying for the fuel at the minute is obviously ridiculously expensive, hotels, etc. So you've got to balance that out by getting enjoyment for what you're putting into it financially. So it's always been my motto. You've got to be playing with a smile on your face at the end of the day, because we're playing football. We're playing football with our friends, and yes, there's going to be times where it's difficult, but it's those times where you lean on each other and stick together, not let your heads drop and kind of just almost go, oh, okay, what's the point? Not that I'm saying they down tools to that point, but you saw the night and day difference between GBG and Sevenoaks, and we'll come on to the Sevenoaks, of course. But I echo what Charlie said earlier. I think it was purely that spirit that saw them overcome GBG eventually.
Yeah, and I think there's certain teams as well that love to defend. Like Sevenoaks are a team that I think genuinely enjoy the art of defending when, they're all sort of burrowed in together at the back, and you've got James Mason, Kyle Alexander, and they're all shouting, and you can tell that they actually are actively enjoying the art of being hard to break down. And Villa are another one that I find similar. I watch them, and I watch Amir Ali, and I watch Hamza Madir and Dave doing his edge of the box antics, and I think they are in their element right now. I don't think GB United's are that team. I don't think that's a group of players that want to be defending all the time. That's a group of players that want to be moving the ball, want to be playing on the front foot. And that's why I think, Ryan, you're right about the relegation suiting them, because they will be able to do that again next season in what's going to be a really interesting championship with some really great footballing teams. Look at we've got GBG Knights, but you've also got GBG Saracens in that league next season. You've got the likes of WBA Baggies, some unbelievable footballing teams. You'd expect that Aspire Warriors aren't going to be, putting it in the dribble if it's a team coached by the Aspire First team. They're going to be trying to play that style of football. So already there, you've got 4 very open footballing teams. So I have to say, I think they will benefit from relegation in that sense. They'll bring back that joy. They've got some really talented players. I rate Oscar Smedley really highly. He's a wide player. He's not a central player, and he shouldn't be utilised as such. He should just be given the wing and free reign. And I think, wherever he chooses to play the football next season, it has to be in a wide position. But I think overall, they're not a team that are well suited to just being under pressure all the time. Unfortunately, in a lot of games in the Premiership, you are going to be under pressure all the time. And so the relegation is going to be a massive positive in that sense.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but I posed the hypothetical question to GBG Knights, if you could redo this season, what would you do differently? If you know that relegation is a likelihood, why not go down fighting it with your own identity, your own attacking football, even if it does mean being a little bit naive, succumbing to fairly significant score lines? Because whilst the quality is a huge step up compared to the Championship, when you look at those standings, on their day, I think probably the bottom 8, the best version of the bottom 8 could probably be anyone, 8 down to 12, would have a good chance against the other teams. So would you rather go down swinging, or would you rather be really pragmatic, really defensive, just about scrape through, and then get another season in the top flight? I don't know. And that's what will be really interesting to say Manchester United again, because we know what to expect with Nottinghamshire. They're a very defensive side when it comes to the 26-27 Premiership. So they will play a very similar form of football as they always have. But Manchester United got promoted, won the championship in a very exciting way, a very GBG Knights-esque fashion. So what version of them comes up will ultimately dictate their safety. But they need to rebuild confidence. They need to re-establish the patterns. They need to rediscover that attacking identity. The fact that you can go a whole league campaign scoring just 3 goals, less than Muscle Warriors, says everything, especially when this was a side that was the top scorers in the entire National League last season with 81 goals. To go from 81 to 3 is ridiculous, even taking into consideration that shift in division. But for me, I think they need to bring in a more defensive profile to support the structure, keep Jack Ewing centrally and build around Oscar Smedley in attack and nowhere else. And if they get that right, I wouldn't be surprised if we see them pushing for an immediate return. Next in the standings, we've got Sevenoaks in 10th, a side that from game week 2 onwards has sat in that 11th place position for almost the entire season. And for a long time, it looked as though they would be drawn into one of those 2 automatic relegation spots. But with the very last game of the season, they produced one of the most remarkable survival performances we've seen, climbing out the bottom 2 and finishing 10th. And that, of course, as said earlier, means they will now contest a Premiership playoff, currently set to face Teesside Steel on Saturday, June the 6th. There's been a bit of mixed messaging around the squad as to whether or not that fixture will take place. But the message from me to Sevenoaks is pretty simple. Until you have written confirmation otherwise, you prepare as if that fixture is happening. Simple as that. I was a little bit disappointed with the mixed messaging that they received, that they were celebrating survival and Premiership football for 26-27 because they assumed Teesside Steel weren't able to contest it. And even if that is the case, until it's confirmed, don't assume. But remarkably, Sevenoaks gained more points in the final weekend than in their first 4 weekends combined. Talk about a survival push. They also scored their first goals of 2026 across Gameweek 5. They opened with the weekend with a 1-1 draw against Villa Rockets, a side coming off the back of being named the Swizzles team in the weekend from Gameweek 4. So naturally, a daunting fixture considering that short turnaround. Most would have expected Villa to get the job there done. And once they took the lead early on, it looked as if defeat was almost inevitable. But Stanley Ball, a brilliant breakaway goal, firing it off the back of Hamza Madir's chair to secure a massive point. A point that ultimately, if you look at it this way, that secured them safety. And that's the difference, getting points against others beyond the bottom 2. Then they were 3 points behind GBG Knights at that point, obviously factoring in the 3-0 defeat to Aspire and the 0-0 with Middlesbrough. So the equation was simple going into the last game. It was the most incredible fixture scheduling ever, to the point where we had Sevenoaks Muscle Warriors on Court B. We had West Bromwich Albion Throttles versus GBG Knights on Court A. And Sevenoaks needed Throttles to win, and they needed to secure win themselves. And they, because of the far superior goal difference that they had accrued across their 21 games previously, a win would see them secure safety, or would certainly put them in that playoff. The moment Thistles took their lead against GBG Knights, that translated across to Court B without question. And I think Sevenoaks just understood the assignment. They locked in, and that's when they raised their level. They found their breakthrough in the first half. James Mason who was sensational all weekend, a very deserved feature in the fantasy team of the weekend. Delivered the ball across the box. Stanley Ball finishes brilliantly against his former side, squeezing it between Hannah Hindley and Ricken Shah. From there, they were in control. Kyle Alexander was virtually untested as the most defensive of the four players, because James Mason was dictating everything centrally. And then the second goal, I know you was calling the action on court A, Gregg, which we have the functionality now to switch and change camera angles. So you was watching what I was, indirect free kick executed as intended. It was the clearest, most obvious route to their second goal you could possibly imagine, and my commentary probably reflects that, because George Shippey just brilliantly positions himself on one side of the goal line with a gap to the side of him. So all it needed was Mason to ensure accuracy and a little bit of power on his ball in, and it was going to be an inevitable and a certain 2-0, and it was job done. And with that, they end a 24 league match without a win in that one, which dates back to the 31st of May 2025, and also scored twice in a league match for the first time in 33 matches. Last time was versus Norwich in April 2025. Charlie, let's bring you in to begin with. Give me your assessments from Sevenoaks. It was an incredible weekend, wasn't it?
Yeah, just immense. An absolute fairy tale, as I said. I think if West Brom weren't so good, they would have been team of the weekend. They would have thoroughly deserved that. And ultimately, they just, everything that we've bemoaned about GBG Knights and Muscle Warriors, sort of the lack of organisation, potentially the lack of fight, they just showed that in absolute abundance, didn't they? They were incredible. The way they've battled through what must have been one of the toughest seasons for any side ever in the National League, with a player availability and loss and just tragedy everywhere you turn. And it felt like, when are Sevenoaks going to get their break? And they finally got it this weekend. All of their own doing, and all completely deserved. I thought James Mason was unbelievable. I thought Kyle Alexander led the team fantastically. George Shippey and Stanley Ball are improving literally every single game I watch them. Weirdly for them, that it's potentially different to a lot of wingers. The defensive side of their games has developed quicker than their attacking side. A lot of the time, the attacking side comes, and then you have to train them up on how to, defend the edge of the box and do that sort of the more mature side of the game. But they've always been excellent at that, literally since the start, and they're so well drilled tactically, and you could really tell that. I probably, to be fair, on commentary had their lesser of the two performances. I had their Middlesbrough game and the game against Aspire, and those were probably their worst two performances of the weekend. But even in those games, they showed a huge amount of spirit and fight. And ultimately, they knew what they needed to do. They knew that they needed to win their last game going into it. Is a great position to be in, and they just went at it. And I know there was mixed messaging about, staying up, or are they going to have to contest the playoff? But to be honest, I don't think it matters. I think, let's say Teesside Steel even do feel their strongest four and have everybody available, I would back Sevenoaks massively in that game with the wave that they're currently riding and just the quality that they have. I actually don't know that they would benefit from going down to the Championship. I think some of their players would. I think maybe the wingers could do, but also like James Mason and Kyle Alexander don't need to learn in the Championship anymore. They're experienced enough players in the Premiership and good enough players in the Premiership that it would be a real shame for them. I'm just delighted for the whole club. And we saw, the full-time whistle over on Court B, just the emotion that was pouring out of all of the players. And Sevenoaks are clearly a special club. And they've clearly done things in the right way for years, because I think a lot of people were rooting for them, and a lot of people were so happy for them at the end. And even you look at Throssell's, and it felt like Throssell's had something more to play for and had the real bit between their teeth to try and keep Sevenoaks up. Obviously Abby Bolt was a woman on a basically mission to try and keep Sevenoaks up and to get that result that they needed. And yeah, it was brilliant. And the whole weekend and the whole season from them, that they've got lots of praise, rightly so. I'm so happy for them, and best of luck to them if they do end up playing in the playoff. But I don't think they're going to need it, because I just think they're going to be too good, and they'll just get their way through with relative ease.
Yeah, there's going to be no surprise here, but I'm about to wax lyrically uh, about this club, the four players on the court, everyone in the support network around it. The club posted it, I think, yesterday. You know, the three words that describe grit, determination, and resilience. You're not going to see, I think, a team embody those three words. I don't think we have seen a team embody those in the National League. And I don't think we will for years to come. They were just incredible. And you could see they were playing and fighting for something more this weekend. And they have been all season. There's been no lack of effort or fight. They just were so together. I said this, I couldn't be prouder of them. Everyone knows my connection, and I must admit, and I said it on commentary, it was the biggest test of my commentary professionalism was at Throssell's GBG United game, because obviously I wanted Sevenoaks to do it. And Charlie, you're right. Abby Bolt was a woman on a mission. You could see what it meant to her. She was emotional during the game. I've never felt an atmosphere quite like it. You know, it's last game on a Sunday, it's last game of the season. Usually there's nothing really riding on them, and everyone's kind of waiting for the game to be over, and we always go home and reflect on the season. But there was so much emotion in that hall at full time, even during the game. They were just embodied everything that I think, especially Miles Miller, would be so proud of. And you mentioned that with the defensive work that George Shippey and Stanley Ball have done, it was like they just channeled Miles. It's like he just decided to join him and become a fifth player on the court for them. He championed that defensive, gritty, edge of the box ratting. He absolutely loved it. And George and Stanley just became that this weekend and showed the quality they're developing on the wings. James Mason is fast becoming one of the better ball-playing goalkeepers in the division. His distribution is unbelievable when he gets it right. And Kai Alexander is just the glue and the heartbeat of this team. He's the captain. He leads from the front. He's vocal. He is so encouraging. He praises everyone, keeps their heads up. And he's had to do that a lot this season. It's been so unbelievably tough for all of them. But like I said, I couldn't be prouder of them. I know, Ryan, you'd say, we'd all say the same thing, but I know, Ryan, you'd say that as well, because you obviously have a soft spot for them as well. But they were, I think, right. Charlie's right. If West Brom hadn't been as good as they were, they'd have won Team of the Weekend, purely for the guts that they showed to pull themselves out of the relegation mire that they seem to be destined for. Like we said, I thought that the draw with Muscle Warriors earlier on in the season was going to be the downfall for them. I've said it on Gameweek 3 and Gameweek 4 reviews. But somehow they dug deep, found another gear, and will be in a playoff where, I mean, technically I'm meant to have split loyalties, aren't I? But I'm Sevenoaks all the way to the playoff. I couldn't wish them any more luck, and I, like Charlie, think they'll be absolutely fine.
Yeah, I did vote for West Bromwich Albion as the team of the weekend for game week 5 of the Premiership, but I voted for Sevenoaks as my team of the season in the recent award voting. I just think when you apply all of that context, everything they've had to face, the story is incredible. The level of togetherness and performance is incredible. And to echo you, Gregg, incredibly proud. I think the biggest takeaway for me is just how well they handled the pressure. 5 points from a possible 12 doesn't fully reflect the level of performances they produced this weekend. And I said, after commentating that Villa game, if they play like that across the entirety of the weekend, they don't get relegated. There is no world they get relegated. And that proved to be the case. I'd even go as far as to say that version of Sevenoaks we saw across those 4 fixtures, scale that up across the season, then they match the levels of Middlesbrough and Throssell's, and they secure safety well beyond the final weekend. Individually, James Mason stepped up massively. I think it would be unanimously agreed he's their most complete player. Attitude, application, ability, someone you would trust in all of the 4 positions, but predominantly takes that central role. But it was this weekend, alongside Kyle, they had to lead the young group and bring them with them. Stanley Ball produced his best instinctive finishing I've seen from him. George Shippey had his strongest overall performance of the season. It was just this perfect coming together of so many elements that have been slowly building across the season. And again, what makes it more impressive is when you consider the context. They've done this with a squad of 4, no substitutes. They had no coaches present this weekend. So I know Rob Ball and John Shippey was stepping in on the sidelines. And that's without even factoring in the challenges they've had to face across the whole season. So it was incredible. Now, this is a podcast to analyse and assess. We have to play devil's advocate in a way. There's still areas to improve, naturally. George Shippey and Stanley Ball, as well as they perform, they do need to develop their play in reverse and attack, to Charlie's point, because they're very defensively minded at the moment. And when they are advancing up the court, there is a tendency to drift into the centre, which restricts the space, whereas kind of the top level wingers take that ball wide into the channels to punish teams. So ensuring that readiness, that anticipation, that chair shape, they'll be key considerations. But tactically, I really like what they did. I think, what was the terminology you used, Charlie? Burrowing in earlier as a defensive unit. It's the perfect way to assess it because they are up for the fight. And they've almost got this hybrid system with the defensive wingers, because sometimes it will be George, sometimes it will be Stanley. They don't have a designated defensive winger. It continuously rotates. But after game week 4, the debate that we've had, I did say this side may benefit from relegation just for that confidence piece. And that was more taking into consideration George and Stanley, who had struggled in the 4 weekends prior. I'll retract that now, because what they've shown here is they can compete at this level. That said, they do need to recruit. The squad is too thin, is too fragile. So they need that depth. They need someone to either be that role model, that leader. They need someone to potentially come off the bench and challenge those wide wingers. Chris King could have been that, but availability has clearly been an issue. And you can't ignore how much of a difference that may have made across the season. And I'd also like to see them recruit in a way that allows them to be a bit braver with Kyle Alexander, because I think he would be the first to admit he is not hitting the level we've come to expect, whether it's a confidence or a psychological block. I know he's got issues with his chair, but currently we're seeing James Mason performing at a certain level and Kyle Alexander just slightly below that. It needs them both matching each other stride for stride, and then you'll see the 2 wide wingers benefit, because when there is distribution, when they do break the lines and the opposition pressure, it's always James Mason. And I will echo what you said earlier, Gregg, about him being one of the best ball playing goalkeepers in the division, because his distribution and passing range is excellent. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I think for me, Sevenoaks this weekend came into it with not a lot of pressure, because they are all, for the obvious reasons, wanted to stay up to do those that are no longer with us proud, and the club proud. They didn't want to feel like they'd let them down. But I feel like there was no pressure because I think regardless, there was a positive spin to either staying up or going down. Because if they'd gone down, yes, I think they'd immediately bounce back up because James Mason and Kyle Alexander would have far too good for the Championship, in my opinion. But they could have bled in some of the youngsters we've seen perform really well for the Acorn side and the Vars, for example, and added that sort of squad depth that way, developed those players a little bit, and like you say, given George and Stanley the confidence. But what we saw this weekend was a maturity level from George and Stan far beyond their years. These are two players that have never played Premiership football. This is their first season, and they'd have probably come into it after game week 1, obviously expecting to share the game load between them, playing as that fourth winger or the fifth player as a sub, coming on and rotating. Due to Miles's passing, they've now found themselves having to play every minute of every game in their first ever Premiership season and having to contend with being under pressure for lots of that. And I think it's a credit to not only them as players, but the young men that they're becoming, that they've shown that level of maturity to be able to handle it and step up in the biggest stages when it's mattered.
Yeah, and let's say that we're wrong and they do struggle in that playoff, and Teesside still put in a performance much above what they've been putting in recently. I mentioned sort of the burrowing in and the defensive sort of cohesive unit, but that very quickly becomes a very exciting cohesive attacking unit too. And I could see in the Championship, if Sevenoaks were to get relegated, a very exciting system of sort of not a full 4 out, but like that 3 3/4 that David D always talks about, of Kyle Alexander and James Mason both pushing up, both attacking with those wingers, and they play some of the best football I think that the Championship has ever seen. So either way, I think it's somewhat of a win-win for Sevenoaks, but they'll want to get the job done now. They'll want to go and win that playoff, and they'll want to fully sort of seal off the Great Escape in the way that it deserves to be. And yeah, they deserve a huge amount of credit. I'm so pleased for them. I'm pleased for you, Gregg, and everyone who has an affiliation to Sevenoaks, who I think will have been watching this season, and there will have been times where you just want to sack off Teesside and just go and help them, and want to go run back to them. And I think that there'll be a lot of players that will have felt like that this season. But yeah, the fact that they've touched so many players in the community is so. It's just indicative of the characters that they have within that squad and within that sort of team and wider carer and parent base as a whole.
I think that's the issue with where the club is based, is the recruitment issue. It's something that is just indicative of the South in general at the minute. It doesn't help, obviously, when the likes of me and Harry Bestwick then move out the area. So that is something they're going to struggle with potentially.
Just on that, area is very relative when referencing you, and you was more down south, because you was what, 90 minutes, 2 hours away from Sevenoaks?
Yeah, I was about an hour, when I was at uni I was an hour away, but when I was at home I was about an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's an issue that has been a constant factor in the club's development over the last 3-4 years. And even when referencing Stanley Ball and George Shippey, I remember introducing Stanley to the sport in 2021. So when you compare him to some of the more established players, he's still incredibly inexperienced. So if they're not able to recruit from within the competition structure, it puts that whole reliance on recruiting and developing from within. And I know Sevenoaks have plenty of players in their Acorn squad and below that, but we are talking about this being the most unforgiving division possible, and you cannot put youngsters into this pressure cooker because it will have huge detrimental impacts in the long term. And that element of enjoyment we've spoken about at the start is eradicated. It's not even a consideration. And we've seen far more inexperienced older players crumble and suffer as to the demands of the division. But overall, a huge credit they have given themselves a chance, and if they carry this level of performance into the playoff, they come through easily for me and build on it next season. And there's no reason why they can't establish themselves once again as a solid Premiership side, because that version is more than good enough. Next in the standings, in 9th, we've got Middlesbrough. And whilst it wasn't mathematically confirmed going into Gameweek 5, we all knew they would be playing their Premiership football again next season. This weekend, they saw a 0-0 draw with Muscle Warriors, a 2-0 defeat to Greenbank, a 0-0 draw with Sevenoaks, and a 3-0 loss to Newcastle United Foundation. So 4 games, 2 points, no goals scored. Now, I don't quite know how to judge Middlesbrough, and I don't want to sound overly critical. It depends probably on what lens you apply. If you are comparing them to the 3 sides that finished below them, is a very strong season. Survival secured, with comfort, with that defensive solidity. But if you want to even utter the names of Throssell's, Villa, Newcastle into that conversation, it does feel slightly underwhelming for me. Because there is a huge gap between them and that pack above them. And I can't help but think they could have or should have been a little bit braver across game weeks 4 and 5, maybe, because relegation was never a threat. Charlie, give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm with you. We saw them experiment the most I've ever seen them experiment against Newcastle, and that was exciting. In a way, it was a bit strange. In other ways, they played some very weird combinations, and it resulted in some relatively hairy moments for them within that game. But I kind of respected it, and I liked to see it. I wish they'd done it sooner, because the season sort of did peter out for them massively, didn't it? A lot of 0-0 draws, a lot of being on the wrong side of narrow 1-0 defeats, and while they've had some good results this season, that they mentioned the 0-0 draw with Aspire and some wins as well. They've not really kicked on from last season, I'd say. They were solid last season and they stayed up, and they've done the exact same thing this season. And I don't know, for me, they basically sort of secured their place in the league after like game week 3. So the last 2 game weeks, they could have been experimenting, and they have some real talent within that squad. So I would have liked to see them sort of use it a bit better and make themselves at least see what's out there as an option for them for a new system, because they're still in the cup. They're in the cup quarterfinals, and if they could have found a brand new formula and a new exciting way to play before that, it could have been really beneficial to them. So yeah, I have to say I'm relatively pleased with I'm relatively pleased with them overall, that they've managed to stay up, but also I would have liked to see a little bit more from them.
I don't disagree that they experimented heavily in their fixture against Newcastle United Foundation. It was a crazy game. And I think across the 40-minute fixture, all of their squad featured in all of the different positions possible. But that's not necessarily the experimentation I've been calling for. It's more the tactics I want to see them be braver with, not the player utilisation. So when I consider James Found and Umar Hanif, 2 of the best defensive players in the country, but 2 that have the potential to really embody that England way of playing, because they're on the National Emergent Talent Programme, they have ability, but the system restricts them heavily. So when I say I want them to be braver, I want them to be more experimental, it's not putting Ethan Galloway in between the sticks. It's not putting James Found out wide. It's just being braver with the tactics and committing players forward. Greg, give me your assessments.
Yeah, I'm going to completely disregard the Newcastle game purely because it was last game of the season. They couldn't go down. They clearly just went to have some fun with it. and it was fun to watch. I've watched it back, and my word, entertaining is doesn't even begin to describe it, does it? It was absolutely incredible. Yeah, I think they'll be disappointed with the weekend. Looking at the fixtures they had, we've just praised Sevenoaks to the high heavens, but they'd have fancied themselves to win that one. I think it was just a clash of one side having everything to play for, and one having nothing to play for really. They'll be really disappointed with the 0-0 draw against Muscle Warriors, though. Only the second team to draw with Muscle Warriors all season. I agree with the wanting to see a little bit more experimentation in terms of style, because for me, I've constantly and continually praised James Found. For me, he is one of the most underrated ball playing goalkeepers in the division, purely from when I see him, whenever the ball comes back to him and he wants to go on a full speed every now and again, he distributes it so well. It never comes to anything, but I see the potential there. I see the potential he has in a more attacking system, and that's what I think frustrates me a little bit. But your point is, they had more than enough to be good enough to beat the sides below them and be clear of relegation. But there's a big gap between the teams above them. Like Throstles were incredible this season. Newcastle, Villa. There's levels. They're almost in a league of their own, Middlesbrough, aren't they? Too good to go down and be dragged into that situation, but not good enough to compete with the mid-table sides, or not as consistent enough going forwards, because they certainly frustrated teams defensively. Drawing with Aspire in the season, etc. It's going to be an interesting discussion, I think, in the summer about players and what system they want to play with and where they want to go. Are they like you say, to your point, Ryan? Are you happy burrowing in, as that's the term we're all using now, burrowing in and just securing Premiership safety year on year, or do you want to take a risk, grow, and potentially could lose more, but grow and establish yourself as more of a mid-table side and attack with more threat? Because the player profile this season was there for that, without a shadow of a doubt.
Completely agree. And that's why I want to see them be a little bit braver. And I say that knowing full well their approach has worked this season. They've stayed up again. One of the very, very few sides to get promoted from the Championship in recent years and maintain their Premiership status. So when you look at it through that lens, they're outperforming pretty much any and every other team that is in a similar situation. And they've done it with the organisation, the discipline, being difficult to break down. But the season and the weekend felt a little bit underwhelming, because certainly Gameweek 5, to go 4 games without scoring, particularly when there's no jeopardy, when you're playing Muscle Warriors at the bottom, when they played Sevenoaks at the time they were 11th, it's tough to see. And even if those results themselves, they're not disastrous from a Borough perspective, but it's clear that there's no attacking output. And that has been the theme: controlled, safe, reactive. And they've won it more they've stayed up more with their defence than they have than any form of attack. And James Found is the perfect person to keep going back to, because he is one of the best reactive defensive players in the country. But he has the ability to be more than that. He is used so sparingly. And because of that, we don't see the other sides of other parts of his game develop. And if we compare him with Umar Hanif, very similar age, very similar profile of player, very similar ceiling, I'd go as far as to say. But Umar is getting a little bit more exposure, more versatility, a bit more freedom. So you'd probably pick or put your chips in Umar's corner as opposed to James, because he's given that bit more license to roam up the court. It doesn't necessarily make him a better player, but it accelerates his development. If they can find a system that promotes both of them and puts both of them with equal responsibility, that is an incredibly exciting pairing. And I would just say to Middlesbrough now, you've had 2 cracks of the Premiership, you've been safe on both occasions. Why not go for it next season to hopefully fast track the development of your players who have England aspirations? It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really simple equation for me. It's like, do you want to basically they have to choose stick or twist this summer. Those are the 2 options. It's either I think they'd have enough to stay up again next season if that's what they wanted to. Although I do think there's a chance that they could be dragged into the playoffs next season if they carry on playing the way they are right now, because I think this is probably one of the strongest sets of promoted sides we've had in recent years. Obviously, if Sevenoaks stay up as well, it's going to be a really tough league down at the bottom next season, a lot tougher than this year. But there's obviously a world where they could try and do, a sort of fancy new system and it doesn't work, a bit like Throttle's last season. But there's also a world in which they try something new and it's massively effective and they end up securing loads of points, a bit like Throttle's this season. So you sort of, with that one squad, you've seen the different sides of the coin. And yeah, and we're not asking them to all of a sudden start playing this ridiculous, 4-out system where they're constantly overcommitting into attack and just full sending every game. Like if they want to sit in and defend against your Aspires, your T-size Leeds, that I get that completely, and I think that's the better thing for them to do. But there are times where they could really go for the teams around them, and particularly the teams below them, like. They will have been really disappointed this weekend to draw to both Middlesbrough and Sevenoaks, and not Middlesbrough, they are Middlesbrough, to draw to both Sevenoaks and Muscle Warriors. They would have been really, really frustrated with that. And Gregg, you and I commentated on the Sevenoaks game together, and they didn't offer a huge amount, and they didn't offer a huge amount against Villa in Gameweek 4 either, which is one we did together. I just think they need to start committing more forward, because they have the players and they have the quality, and also they have the coaches to do it. Like Paul Yates and Carolyn Goldsborough are brilliant coaches who know exactly what they're doing and who know the sport as sort of top officials, who know the sport better than most people. So they have the both communicative ability and sort of the tactical sort of nous to be able to implement something a bit more ambitious. So I'm hoping that next season we might see a reformed and slightly improved Middlesbrough, but you just never know. But yeah, they can't afford to just plateau, because eventually someone is going to catch up with them. The way this league goes is that every year the quality improves, and they survived the improvement in quality without particularly improving themselves this year. But I worry for them that if they don't improve next year, even next year, or definitely the season after, could be the time where their plateauing does catch up with them a little bit.
I agree to Charlie's point that I think next season is going to be really hard for the team at the bottom. The 2 teams coming up at the minute look very strong, and we know what Nottingham can do in the Premiership and how defensively solid they are. Charlie clearly enjoys commentating with me, because he's imagined that we did the Middlesbrough Sevenoaks game together. It was him and David D. That was that was fun. Because I didn't actually touch a Sevenoaks game this weekend. But yeah, no, I from what I saw this weekend, there's just that decision now of, like Charlie says, stick or twist. That's all it is. Is do you want to be brave, or do you look at the quality coming up for the Championship this season and going, you know what, we're quite happy just to try and survive.
When I look at it, I look at the names that they've got, mainly Carl Forster and Ethan Galloway. They are senior internationals for Northern Ireland and Scotland, respectively. Proven players, proven goal scorers. but they're just not getting the service. And the numbers reflect that. Ethan Galloway finishes the season without a single goal or assist. And for a player of that level, that's not about ability. That's about system. And more broadly, only 3 goal scorers across the entire campaign in Carl Forster, Umar Hanif and Thomas Pettigrew in what we're saying is a really strong squad on paper. So it's starting to become an issue, because if you don't have that standout scorer, the responsibility has to be shared, and it currently isn't. So they've done what they've needed to. They've stayed up again. So to Gregg's point, to Charlie's point, do they stick with this approach and aim for stability? Do they evolve, take a few more risks and try to push into that middle bracket? Because they've got the players to do it. It just needs them to take a risk. And that is, it's as simple as that. Right now, a solid defensive side, but no limited attacking output. But ultimately, job done. And they will be a team in the Premiership next season. Next in the stand-ins in 8th, we've got West Bromwich Albion Throstles. And it was a slightly strange end to the season for them. A side that, much like Middlesbrough, came into Gameweek 5 knowing they were safe. There was no real jeopardy, no real pressure. And I do think that translated into the performances we saw across the weekend. They opened with a heavy 4-0 defeat to Leeds, followed by a 3-0 loss to Newcastle United Foundation, and then a 2-0 defeat to West Bromwich Albion. So 3 consecutive losses without scoring to start the weekend. And for a side that had built so much of its success on structure, discipline, staying in games, that probably fell below the standard we've come to expect from them. But they did, however, finish the season strongly. A 3-0 win over GBG Knights. And it was a performance that felt much more like the Throstles we've seen across the campaign, where they were controlled and ultimately getting the job done with very little fuss. Gregg, you first here. Give me your assessments on West Bromwich Albion Throstles, because whilst it was a fairly underwhelming game week 5, they were brilliant across the entirety.
Yeah, I think for me the story of Throstles is just the turnaround from last year, isn't it? Absolute night and day difference for a side that were just like 1 goal away from being relegated automatically last year to now being comfortably mid-table. And I mean, like, comfortably, they were so much better than the teams below them. Yes, this weekend wasn't exactly the fitting end to the season that they would have liked. I think you have to take the context of their fixtures, for example. I mean, Leeds, obviously league champions. Newcastle, who are very tough for anyone to break down and have quality in attack. And a West Brom side that, I mean, this weekend were the West Brom of old, weren't they? And we'll get onto that later on. The GBG Knights game, they showed what they're about. Defensively solid. The defensive work of Parth Gagwad that, Ryan, I know you raised time and time again. He kept the side in the game at 1-0 alongside Reg Kemp. Abby Bolt is just that standout player for them and has to deal with being the pressure of doing captain and coaching. But she was, like we said earlier, was a woman on a mission in that game, clearly playing for something more. And then we've seen the sort of resurgence of Amy Wharton as well, you know, who has come into a little bit of form and has kept, you know, an experienced player, international player in Tom Donaher out of the starting lineup in some of those games, especially. So there's a really good squad there, a core that has been built, and they've had confidence this season from playing some really nice football and being defensively sound and enjoying the fact that they're not having to scrap for relegation survival, and just enjoyed it. So I think with the context of the weekend and who they played, overall, fantastic season for Throstles and a job well done for them.
Yeah, I think the Newcastle game this weekend is the only one that they'll maybe look back on with a bit of frustration, because they were only a few points off Newcastle when the game kicked off, and you know they maybe shouldn't have been beat so convincingly, but Newcastle did have a great weekend. Overall, though, it's been a quality season for Thrussels. They got the results in all the games they needed to. All those, it felt like every game that was, teetering out to be a 0-0, they managed to snatch it and make it a 1-0 in their favour, which has, seen them amass a very, very good points total. And I just have to give a lot of credit to Abby Bolt. For me, I voted her coach of the season because of the way that she has reformed Thrussels this year after last season when they played some very experimental football under Colin Gordon and it just didn't work out. To then come back in and go, right, what do we have in this squad? She very quickly took stock and was like, right, who are we playing where? And the system that she set up with Path on the goal line, doing incredible work, and he is such a good in terms of his reflexes. There's very few better at just saving the ball on the goal line, and he could have basically a save of the season montage of his own. Like it's incredible some of the stops he's made for Thrussels this season. Obviously, sort of an obvious choice to use Regan Kemp as that central player, such a strong and technically good player, but to put him in that goalkeeper shirt so that he could do the top of the box defending. And then the wing partnerships, it felt like whichever wing partnership they opted for, um, they found a way to still create stuff and still gain territory. The Greenbank game is for me the highlight of the season for them. The 1-0 win over Greenbank. That was a real sort of show of where they've been this season and how far they've come. And I'm really excited to see how they can continue because under the coaching of Abby, they've improved pretty much every single time they've played. And although they didn't finish the season necessarily as strongly as they might have liked, ending with a big win, when I actually think there was surprisingly a lot of pressure on them in that game. People wouldn't necessarily see it; they'd see it as a dead rubber that GVG United game. But I know, for example, Abby would have taken that massively on herself to sort of go out there and perform for Sevenoaks. And so I think that there was actually just perhaps deceptively large amount of pressure. And obviously everyone was watching just because of the relegation battle. So there was a lot of eyes on the game and they came out and put in a really professional performance and 3-0 was a strong scoreline. So overall, a fantastic season. This weekend, other than the Newcastle game, which could have been a bit better, I think they performed as expected and yeah, they'll be very pleased. Very pleased with the progress they've made, and I'm sure West Brom will reevaluate in the summer. Are there going to be players from the first team that drop down potentially for more minutes at Thrussels? Are there players from the second team, from the third team? Sorry, Baggies. You Noah Stevenson Lees that potentially are going to make a step up. So they may even be even stronger squad wise next season. I think there will be some shuffling around within West Brom, and yeah, I hope Thrussels come out on the good side of that for once. It feels like a lot of the time Thrussels end up being weakened when this sort of shuffling of the pack happens. But I genuinely think this summer could be one of the first times that we see Thrussels come out of that transfer window considerably stronger than they went in. So I'm really excited for them next season.
Yeah, I think this has been, we know this has been an incredibly demanding season for everyone. But when you consider Thrussels, who rely so heavily on structure, discipline, collective effort, that physical and mental load across 5 weekends can take its toll. And that doesn't even take into consideration how quick the turnaround was between game weeks 3, 4, and 5. Add to that the fact they had nothing riding on these games, and it probably explains the drop off in terms of output. But zooming out, this season has been night and day compared to last year, where they finished on just 11 points. So to conclude the season on 28, it shows the progression, both in terms of performances and point accumulation. And they've been safe from any conversation of relegation since pretty much game weeks 1 or 2, which in itself is a huge achievement. Because ultimately we know what Thrussels are. They are not a side that dominate games. They're not going to overwhelm teams with attacking football. Their success comes from set piece delivery, from moments, from transitions, counter-attacks. And when they get ahead, more often than not by a 1-0 scoreline, they protect it with everything they've got. And I think they end the season, 7 of their 9 wins this season have come by that very scoreline, which tells you everything about their kind of shape and their approach. Just to touch on a few of the points, that the combinations between Abby Bolt and Tom Donoghue have been really positive. Tom in particular has bounced back after a really difficult campaign last season with Norwich. And whilst we've only seen flashes of his attacking quality within the system, those moments have been important. And that's kind of the distinction between Throssell's and the teams below them, that they all are very defensively minded, but it's the attackers being ready to attack if and when the ball comes to them. When I look at the squad's depth, it impresses me. You highlighted Amy Wharton. I think she's a brilliant player. We know how tenacious Amy Lee Julian is. You've got Jonathan Davis there as well, all of which across the 22 league game seasons, not looking at game week 5 in isolation, have had to settle for far less minutes than they would have liked. But we saw where they finished last season, so it needed this shifting system. The question is, it's the same with Borough, where do they go now? So we'll have to be dictated by the player profiles they have at their disposal. But do we see them continue playing this structured reactive style and secure another year in the Premiership? Or is it time to be a little bit braver? Because to Charlie's point, coming into game week 4 and game week 5, they was right in that bracket with aspirations of finishing 5th. Above Villa, above Newcastle, above their sister club, West Bromwich Albion. But they faltered. And I think that's more because there was a little bit of a lack of bravery more than a lack of quality. Not a criticism in any way. It's just the next step, because you have to continue to evolve. And the moment you continue to sit still is the moment you regress in this division, because it is unforgiven. Okay, next in the standings, in 6th, we've got Villa Rockets, a side we waxed lyrical about following game week 4. And whilst they didn't quite hit those same heights this weekend, there's a lot of context that needs to be factored in. They opened with a 1-1 draw against Sevenoaks, and through the lens of Villa, that probably isn't quite good enough given the standards they've set themselves. They took the lead, looked in control, but weren't able to maintain that advantage. They did respond later that day with a strong 4-0 win over Muscle Warriors. A really professional performance where they took control and got the job done comfortably. But Sunday is where things dipped. A 4-0 defeat to Aspire, followed by a 4-0 loss to West Bromwich Albion. So when you zoom out, it's 4 games, 4 very different outcomes, and a weekend that probably just saw them run out of steam. And the key context, as mentioned here, was illness. It was clearly running through the squad. Players affected across the weekend. Hamza Madir missing games, others not at full capacity, and you could see it. They looked drained, physically below their usual level. And to be honest, some of them shouldn't have even been there. It must be said. So I don't think it's fair to be overly critical, because the effort to get through that weekend is really commendable. Gregg, you first here. Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's just the point, isn't it? I mean, some of them put themselves through games they probably shouldn't have been playing just to see the season out and try and finish on as much of a high as they could. Because after game week 4, everyone was rightfully praising them so much. They were team of the weekend for a reason. It just didn't quite manifest this weekend, but it's another season of just being really solid. Seriously solid, and frustrating teams above them. Obviously, nowhere near relegation. Now, you don't even need to think about that with Villa with the squad they've got. Again, another year of the combination defensively between Amir Ali and Umsmadir just being absolutely rock solid. Dave Lewis's experience, his tactical nous, his ratty behaviour on the edge of the box, and I mean that in the greatest respect. Of course, just frustrating teams and allowing them to build them a foundation of solid defence, but they counter attack with lightning speed. David Lewis can bring the ball up the court, and then you always got the experience of Rosie Hodgson on the far side to finish off some of the chances that they do create with that mix of use and experience on the bench. Bobby Allen, another player who's played through the pain barrier and the uncomfortableness barrier this season for all of it, to be honest. But it just shows his determination and his ability to put the team first, perhaps when it's possibly not advised, is a credit to him and his family, because I know it's not been easy for the Allens recent times, but they're a lovely family and a lovely group. And then obviously Kieran Burns got a goal this weekend. Obviously got Nicky Baker on the bench as well. Just that ability to bring on experience and whenever they need to. So solid season with Villa, really solid. They've had some highs, that win against Teesside in Gameweek 4 being one of them. But obviously this game week they just ran out of steam, but I don't think to no fault of their own. It's just illness and they're just illness, wasn't it? Fatigue that just was their undoing.
Yeah, I think they were far from full strength this weekend. Obviously, Sunday for me just showed how good Hamza Madir is, because without him, they just looked a completely different equation. And I know that Dave Lewis was, coughing his lungs up and stuff, so I'm not gonna say that he's the only reason that they were struggling. But yeah, they were definitely without some key players, and they had other key players that were not at their best. But overall, still, a decently solid weekend. I think had they had a full strength side, the West Brom game, last game of the season, would have been really interesting, because they beat them early on in the season, and that would have been a really fiery one. But I think for Villa, they'll know that if they can keep their squad together for next season, which I don't see why they won't be able to, that they're gonna improve on what they've got now. They'll back themselves to finish sort of best of the rest, or maybe even flirt with trying to get into that top parts of the table. They can easily now swat away opposition in and around them. In terms of Villa Rockets used to struggle with games against teams in the sort of the bottom four, but now it's like they go into those games heavy favourites. And that next season it'll be about winning the ones against teams around you. I think this season they've been a bit unlucky at times. You look at the Newcastle game at the last National League weekend, the Middlesbrough game at the last National League weekend, even the Sevenoaks game on Saturday. Although Sevenoaks showed some real heart and desire, they had a massive chance through Rosie Hodgson to go back ahead, and she unfortunately couldn't finish from relatively close range. But they've had some ups and downs this season, Villa Rockets, but overall I think they'll be really pleased, and they've been a real joy to watch. They're one of my favourite teams to commentate on, just because they play with their heart on their sleeves. You can see how much it means to them, and the fact that they did have that many players there battling with illness this weekend just shows to me and just reaffirms to me that that they're really in for sort of the long haul, this group of players, and they're going to fight for each other and for the club for as long as possible. So overall, a really good season. Game week 5, I'm sort of willing to almost just disregard it completely, because you just can't perform when you're missing your best player, who for me is Hamza Madir. I actually voted for him as defensive player of the season. I'll stop naming my votes because I don't want to bias people, but he's one that I'm happy to name. I think he was unbelievable all season in goal for Villa. Some of the saves he made, some of the interventions. You look at the Teesside game, and he was just absolutely mammoth. And yeah, without him, they lived a shell of themselves, which I understand. So yeah, I'm not willing to take much stock from this weekend. But overall, really pleased with them and how they progressed this season. And I think next season that they'll look to just be bigger and better than they were this year.
I think Villa alongside Newcastle are the two teams that perfectly balance defense and attack. They know how to dig in, to maintain structure, but it will never be at the detriment of their attacking output. And I know they finished on -4 goals, but that was more skewed by the games getting away from them in Gameweek 5 when we're layering all this context. We had the conversation, Greg and I, on the Championship Gameweek 5 recap about noting or not noting our votes for end of season. I think having listened to it back, we all but commented on who we're going to vote for in certain categories. So I'm not necessarily going to shy away from that here. I will echo what you've said about Hamza Madir. Absolutely central to all of their success. I also voted for him as Defensive Player of the Season. And I think he is in with a real shout of getting it because he is ridiculously good. But the thing I like about Hamza is he's just as good up the court as he is kind of in his defensive half. And that's what I'd want to see Villa try and promote next season, is to use him more of an attacking sense because he's very highly regarded on the England system, worth noting. Rosie Hodgson, a good weekend in attack, a goal against Sevenoaks, a brace against Muscle Warriors, takes her to 7 league goals for the season, finishing as joint top goal scorer for Villa. When you add in her assists as well, she's into double-digit goal contributions, something I challenged her to do in one of the previous recap podcasts. So a strong first season with the club. Dave Lewis, 7 goals, 10 assists, incredibly consistent across the campaign. He's in my fantasy team of the season, by the way. I thought he was excellent across the 22 league games. His goal against Muscle Warriors was his 150th league goal, so huge congratulations to him. Only the 11th player to reach that milestone. He has goals for West Bromwich Albion, Throssels and Villa Rockets. And it's worth noting, as it's on my notes from Jeff Lewis, that for all the people that have scored 150 league goals, Dave has the best looking father. That's the notes I've got here. So you can't say that I don't follow it. We saw Bobby Allen feature centrally, both as first and second pivot, more because of the absence of Hamza. But technically, I thought he was excellent, really comfortable on the ball. But it's clear there are limits physically in terms of how much his body can handle right now. And you hope he can address those issues in the off-season because his potential is huge, up there with Hamza and some of the best young players in the country. To echo Gregg, it was good to see Kieran Burns get on the score sheet against Muscle Warriors, a really instinctive goal, anticipating well and finishing. And for him, that probably meant a lot because it's been a frustrating season in terms of minutes. We know the competition for spaces in that squad is huge. Rosie, Bobby, Dave, Hamza, Amir, incredibly difficult to break into that starting unit. And for someone like Kieran, that's a real challenge. And I say this all the time. I truly believe 30, 35, 40 minutes in the Championship, irrelevant of where you are in the placements, is more beneficial than 5 or 10 in the Premiership. There are other factors, of course, things like coaching, geography, role models, but minutes matter. And when we look at Tyler McLellan, his international teammate, willing to play, take a step backwards to build consistent game time, I would like to probably see Kieran do the same if and when he next moves clubs, to be assured of those minutes, because we're not seeing him develop. And this is a statement that can be applied to a lot of players in the Premiership or Championship who sometimes have to swallow a little bit of pride to take a step backwards. So I'm intrigued to see where his next move is. In terms of the weekend itself, as we've said, there was no jeopardy. Combine that with the illness issues and the experimentation, I thought Stuart Allen and now Charlie Hodgson did a really good job. So overall, a really strong campaign, one that betters 24-25. But next season, with maybe a full pre-season, maybe a little refreshment in terms of players, I don't know what they can achieve. they are kind of the controllers of that question. Do they look to keep themselves in the same bracket as the likes of Newcastle, Throstles, maybe even West Bromwich Albion? I don't necessarily know, but take nothing away from a fantastic campaign. Next in the standings, Newcastle United Foundation in sixth. Probably my favourite team in the division to watch this season. Coming into the campaign, there wasn't a huge amount of expectation around final league position. And where they've ended up is probably reflects the stage they're at as a squad. But what they have shown consistently is competitiveness, bravery, willingness to test and evolve. They finished Gameweek 5 with 2 wins and 2 defeats, which in many ways sums up their season. But as always with Newcastle, the context tells the real story. The 2 defeats came against title challengers Leeds and Teesside, both by a single goal margin, 2-1 to Leeds, 1-0 to Teesside. Sorry, other way round. And in both games, they were more than competitive. In fact, you could argue they deserved something from at least one, if not both. Against Leeds in particular, with so much on the line, they were exceptional defensively, absorbing wave after wave from the most prolific attacking side in the division. Ollie Crawshaw, Lee Armstrong were immense, completely unfazed and disciplined, and it took that moment of quality from Jack Maxwell to finally break them down. But for large parts, Newcastle looked good for a point. Then against Teesside again, chances created, goals disallowed, moments where they could have taken something, and that's the fine margins at this level. And that's what makes the 2-3-0 wins even more impressive. A dominant victory over Middlesbrough, continuing their perfect record against them, now 6 wins from 6. And another convincing 3-0 win over West Bromwich Albion Throstles to round off the weekend. A brilliant team. Charlie, give me your thoughts.
I love this team. I just love them. I'll go through the individuals soon, but I think just there's something about the spirit. To be fair, I've always had a soft spot for Newcastle in the running game as well. I don't know why. I don't know whether it's the black and white or the toon. There's just something about it that feels such authentic football to me. And Newcastle have really embodied that sort of what football is about this season, the spirit that they've shown. Lee Armstrong, such an experienced operator at the back, and then the wing partnerships of Kieran Steer and Cole Simpson, who's had to really step up and who's done well this season. I'm excited to see what he's got for us next season, because I think there's some very quick fixes to his game in terms of positioning and chair prep, particularly, that could see him really improve next season. I think he just needs to anticipate things slightly better. Try and see the game, a couple of seconds ahead, and then be in the right place. There's often times where the ball breaks to him and he's not quite angled the way that he'd like to be. But if he gets that sorted, and that's something that, watching a lot of footage and just rethinking about your game could do, he'll be massively improved as a result. Amelie Davey, brilliant to see her breaking through. Another strong female player, and she looks like she's only going to get better and better. And then you come to Ollie Crawshaw, and you just think, wow, like the maturity on display this season from Ollie Crawshaw, both on and off the court, has been genuinely incredible. I love Ollie as a guy. I think he's, absolutely top. I think the way that he's, managed to keep composed this season. He's not got frustrated when his teammates have made mistakes around him. And sometimes he's, have passes he's played to, that it hasn't been reciprocated, and chances he's set up where, a teammate's not been able to finish it, or times where he's defended really well and they've ended up conceding because of a lapse of concentration from someone else. Yet he's managed to stay calm, stay positive, which is such a testament to his character. In terms of the game himself, just such a strong dribbler, such a good defender, such an intelligent player, and going the other way as well, a fantastic player going forward. He deserves huge amount of credit for this season. He's going to be one of the top players in the sport before too long, because he's just so good. And yeah, I think this weekend we really saw the best of what he had to offer. Obviously, you mentioned the two big wins, but in the Teesside game, I thought they were brilliant. I thought the 2-on-1 goal that they had disallowed was borderline, and they also hit the post, which could have gone anywhere. And I thought they maybe deserved something. I wasn't blown away by Teesside in that game at all, to be honest. I thought Newcastle easily competed, and then against Leeds again, conceding late on, they were unbelievable against Leeds. Again, I think maybe a decision went against them. I personally think they should have had a penalty at 0-0. Ethan Fisher's just reversed in the box. I think that should have been a penalty to Newcastle. Obviously, that changes the game completely. And yeah, they were fantastic. So unlucky to concede late on. So unlucky. But at the end of the day, does that result matter, particularly at the moment? Like, do they care? Like, it would have been maybe one more point to the total, wouldn't have changed where they finished in the league. And it's got to be the performances that they've got to be proud of. And going to Derby Arena now, I'm just excited to see them play. They've got Middlesbrough in the quarterfinal, which is going to be fiery and great. And then when they get to that semi-final, they can perform like they did against Leeds and Teesside this week, and then who knows what happens. But yeah, I could wax lyrical about Newcastle all day, as you could probably tell, because I've been so impressed with them this season. They sort of everyone was talking about them after Gameweek 1. They sort of become less prominent in the discourse since then, but I think it's time that we really give them their flowers, because they've gone under the radar a bit this season, but they deserve so much credit.
Enough said. Should we move on? I don't. There's not really much more I can add on to what Charlie said there. To be honest, I too have a soft spot for Newcastle. They're just they're a great group. They're fun. They embody the club as a whole. I think the fans and family support is excellent. Create a bit of atmosphere in the arena. Sometimes it could possibly go over the line, but I think they just in general create that atmosphere that sometimes is lacking. Player wise, I could. Ollie Crawshaw for me will get my vote for Young Player of the Season. That's without a doubt for me. I think the big question mark around Newcastle this season coming into it was how do they replace Ethan Fisher? And Ollie Crawshaw has more than stepped up to the mark, so to speak, and filled that role incredibly well and developed so much because Ethan's moved on to Leeds. And obviously, I think that's a move that's worked out for both players. Obviously, Ethan's gone to Leeds and won a league title. Ollie's now got the spotlight at Newcastle and he has grabbed it with both hands. He is fast becoming one of my favourite players to watch in the division. Defensively, incredible. He's become a leader. He's matured, as Charlie says. Going forward, his distribution is absolutely superb. And he's got the supporting cast around him. Lee Armstrong was, like I say, defensively in the Leeds game, monumental. That combination was repelling literally 99% of what Leeds threw at them throughout the entire game. They've got the youth on the wings, Cole Simpson, who, again, I Charlie's point about reacting sometimes quicker, but a very high potential player on the England pathway. Emily Davies' breakthrough came out of absolutely nowhere for the Premiership side, going straight into Premiership, and has taken to it like a duck to water. Clearly enjoying a football, scoring goals, and Kieran Steer just bringing that international experience, to counteract the youth on the wings, bringing in a bit of grit, a bit of determination, a bit of edge to Newcastle's game, with the supporting cast of Matty Harrison and Aaron Guthrie being solid when called upon. So yeah, brilliant season for Newcastle. They've answered any critics or doubters that they may have had coming into it. How are they going to respond to losing Ethan? They responded remarkably well and really promising for next season.
I don't think there was any critics or doubters. I think everyone understood the assignment. Everyone realised the challenges of seeing Sam Smith retire and Ethan Fisher transfer away. And we've said it across the podcast. We said it in the pre-season preview that Jamie Harrison welcomed that new title of underdogs almost. Let them go about their business quietly without the spotlight of title challengers being on them. The biggest takeaway for me from Gameweek 5 and the season as a whole, Newcastle are not far away. It starts, of course, with Ollie Crawshaw. I know we spoke about him a lot after Gameweek 4, but this weekend he went to another level. I actually voted for him as my player of the weekend. I thought he was that good, and maybe that's because I had the benefit of watching the majority of their games. And it was in Gameweek 4 we commended and praised his defensive work, which we already knew was elite. In Gameweek 5, it was the control and dominance in the centre of the court, dictating play, breaking the lines, turning defence into attack. And I had to be corrected by his dad following the last podcast because I was saying it's crazy to think of the level he's performing at just 17. He's still 16 years of age, which is ridiculous because when you consider the maturity, the leadership, the presence, he is the one the group looks to. He is the reference point. And again, we're going to sound like broken records. He's destined for an England shirt. He has posed some very serious questions of Adam McAvoy. And I think Argentina is just going to come just too soon. But beyond that, there is no reason why he can't state a case to be within that senior England side. The thing he was so good at this weekend was peeling away from the dribble in the centre. So Charlie commended his dribbling play, very, very strong. But when that ball was locked up between himself and the opposing player, Ollie was so good at just working the angles, creating the space between the opposition, and then distributing the ball to one of the attacking wide wingers. It's an incredibly tough skill to have. John Bolden's one of the best at it. I reference Ed Common as well. But when the opposition is intent on just keeping that ball between themselves and Ollie, it asks a lot of Ollie. But he works so good in close quarters with another player. Cole Simpson this weekend was brilliant. 7 goals, 9 assists across the season. And it's exactly what you want from an attacking player. To counter Charlie slightly, because I said in game week 4, I want to see him be more decisive, more purposeful, more ready. I thought he showed that across game week 5, far more clinical. He's now scored in 4 consecutive matches against West Bromwich Albion for us. So clearly a side that he likes registering a bit against. Lee Armstrong, I'd go as far as to say his best weekend in a Newcastle shirt. And I know he's been there for quite some time because defensively, rock solid. And his distribution, his composure was superb. That game against Leeds, he looked like a man possessed. And they deserved a point for Lee just as much for anyone else amongst that squad. But why I say it was one of the best weekends in a Newcastle shirt is the glimpses we saw when he was in attack. So good. And if anyone wants a reference point as to that success, go and watch the 3rd goal against Middlesbrough. Ollie working the ball in the centre, as mentioned, peels away, fires the ball diagonally down the court from deep. Lee Armstrong tracks it in reverse down the left-hand wing, as you would view it, the right-hand wing of Newcastle. The most perfect 180 I've probably seen all season, over to Cole Simpson, who fires home over an unopposed goal line. It was so good, but that experimentation with Lee suggests that Newcastle are building something exciting for next season. So we will have to wait for 26-27. Kieran Steer, another positive. That set piece goal against Teesside, sorry to rub salt in the wounds, Gregg, was ridiculously good. The power and the speed of that was one of the best set pieces I've seen all season. And this is a defensive unit that not many have managed to breach.
Yeah, no, we like obviously no one likes to concede goals. Tyler and I looked at each other and went, you know what? The power Cole Simpson gets on the front bumper across the box is ridiculous.
It's because Cole Simpson almost shapes initially to 180 it. You're not expecting that front bumper pass across the box, but it's the initial delivery and power from Ollie Crawshaw that Cole Simpson just almost recycles, because it's not as if he generates the power. He just uses the power of the ball to his advantage, which goes across the box, but the job isn't done there. The 180 of Kieran Steer was incredible.
Yeah, I knew I was in trouble as soon as the ball got past me in the front bumper. And I was just praying that Kieran just had a miss hit and didn't go in. But yeah, he's absolutely connected with it sweetly as anything. And right, it found the way back into the back of our goal. Yeah, like I said, no one likes to see goals, and I was disappointed in that Newcastle game. But it was if you're going to see goals, at least they're going to be good ones.
Yeah, I agree completely. And just to conclude on Kieran Steer, he is a yellow card waiting to happen. I think he got 5 across the season, and he was lucky that one of his yellow cards wasn't picked up on. But temperament is something that he's going to have to control, because a lot of them are avoidable. He just needs to manage that, because it's a very different game than what's played in Scotland, and the referees and the officials are picking up on that now, and you don't want to have a reputation. Emily Davey, great to see her continuing to get minutes and experience at this level. She contributed with a goal and assist across Gameweek 5, which adds to her tally from Gameweek 4. So overall, the takeaway is very simple. Newcastle are competitive against anyone. And I now genuinely think they are one player away from really pushing. I don't know if they're necessarily going to challenge for the title yet, but what we saw in Gameweek 5, especially against Leeds and Teesside, is they are completely at home at this level. And for me, they are the real dark horses in the cup, because relatively speaking, they've got a favourable quarter-final draw against Middlesbrough. They come through that for me with relative ease. And then, depending on the draw, we could see them take a real push to the final. But that will all be decided on Saturday, May the 9th, which isn't too far away. Next in the standings, Swizzle's team of the weekend for Gameweek 5, West Bromwich Albion. And if you judge this weekend in isolation, removing the wider context of the table, I don't think there's a single person who could argue against that accolade and recognition. They were outstanding. Probably, and I've been trying to work it out, that's probably the best I've seen them in about 18 months. 9 points from a possible 12 against that level of opposition is seriously impressive. And there's a very real argument they could, maybe should, have taken all 12. They opened with a 4-0 win over GBG Knights, setting the tone immediately with their attacking intent. That was followed by what I thought was one of the standout performances of the season, not just the weekend, a 1-0 win over Teesside. In truth, that could have easily been 4 or 5. Albion were that dominant in everything they did. And in doing so, they effectively ended Teesside's title hopes. Then came that 2-1 defeat to Leeds. I didn't call it. I have watched it back since. A game that, again, they were right in. An unfortunate own goal and a missed penalty ultimately cost them. But performance-wise, they matched the champions. And on Sunday, that They followed it up with a 2-0 win over Throssels, continuing a remarkable record now. 33 wins from 33 meetings at National League level before closing the weekend with another commanding 4-0 win over Villa Rockets. Charlie, straight to you for this one. Give me your assessments on West Bromwich Albion. Is that them back to their vintage best?
Somewhat, yeah. I think they had to change and adapt. I don't think this has been what I've been waiting to see from West Brom is they've been trying to play, the old West Brom way all season, and it's just not been working. And now with the cup in their sights, they've decided to put together a new system, which really uses each of their players to the best of their abilities. Like it uses Chris Gordon as that focal point, as that distributor. We saw him score a brilliant goal against Leeds. It puts him in positions to do things like that, which he's very capable of. It uses Zach Dickey as sort of that player that should be more involved than a typical winger is, but still able to get wide and impart attacking quality onto the game. It used Lucas Chrysler for his defensive solidity and his ability to be so strong in the dribble and also to get up and play and ball play as well. And then it used Brad Bates the most effectively I've seen him utilised at West Brom since he's returned to West Brom, in that it let him do what he was doing so well at Aspire, which was getting on that reverse spin, creating attacking moments, not really being forced to track back, not being forced into contact, which isn't his strength, but just being allowed to use that sort of weapon that he has, which is that needle-like precision with that reverse spin. And he was able to utilize it, and we saw a couple of devastatingly good passes from him across the weekend. So yeah, it was brilliant from West Brom. They have finished the season really strongly since sort of we saw encouraging signs in game week 3, I thought. But in game week 4, but in game week 5, they just really did step it up. And yeah, if they could score penalties, they would have been so much better off this season, because I think they would have got at least a point out of Leeds in both occasions, potentially 3 points on the first occasion, definitely. So yeah, they're really in a good position. They'll want to sort out that penalty thing before the cup day, I'm sure, because it's become a bit of a sort of I don't know, stigma around them now that that there's a lot of pressure on the next West Brom penalty, and if that's going to be in cup football, it could be in a shootout, and you never want that. But I think they'll be one of the favourites for the cup now, if they can go and replicate that level. Chris Gordon, I'm not surprised that he's managed to mastermind a new system that just uses all the talents of his squad. I'm slightly surprised it's taken him this long, but that's just because of how much of a genius he is. But yeah, it's brilliant to see the system working, and it was just brilliant to see West Brom back at their sort of back competing. It's always felt weird all season, West Brom being so low down the table. Like seeing them in 8th in game week 4 at one point was just it felt ridiculous to me to see that. So it's great to see them back looking strong again, and they were thoroughly deserved team of the weekend because they just performed so well. And you're right, Ryan, that the Teesside performance was one of the best performances I've seen from any team in any game all season.
Yeah, this was West Brom back to their best. I've got I make no bones about making that statement. It was vintage West Brom. It was crisp, clean passing. The moves were unbelievable at times. I mean, we had the pleasure of calling the Throssels game. My word, the 2 goals in that for different reasons. Chris Gordon's long shot is outrageous, and then the team goal between Bates, Gordon, Chrysler, and Dickey is ludicrously good. Ludicrously good. But the long shot came in the Leeds game, didn't it? That's why I'm getting mixed. The long shot came in the Leeds game. 2 goals in the Throssels game. Zach Dickey scores one out of absolute thin air, just finds a gap somehow. But the goals they scored across the weekend were superb. They're playing with a confidence. Brad Bates was back to his best. The game against us, he should have had another assist with a fantastic ball that just cut through Tyler Nine. Zach Dickey knows he should have scored, because I should have had absolutely no chance of making the save. They were completely dominant in our game. We didn't really lay a glove on them. I think that's fair to say. That Leeds game was bonkers for the first 4 minutes. 4 minutes in and it's 2-1. And we're thinking, what, strap in, we're in for an absolute masterclass of a game of football. The penalty miss was bad from Zach, and apparently he took it because he said he'd never missed a penalty before. So probably a bad time to get your first miss. We could see when he was lining up, it wasn't going to threaten Ethan Fisher, but he was sensational. And what I like is we've seen West Bromwich mould Zach into their system. They've taken the confident, loud, boisterous player that is Zach Dickey, the power, and they've molded him. Maybe not tried to lose that character, but fit him into a West Brom system that plays that really nice football. And I think if he can carry that on for the United States, that only bodes well for him as an international player, for his national career with the United States, trying to break back into that squad for the World Cup in Argentina. But overall, really, really good weekend, right for the team of the weekend. And I think a couple of defensive mistakes against Leeds, and they get a point from that, and they're throwing a wrench in the title race. I make them, if they can replicate, obviously this is saying on back one weekend, if they can replicate that form, I make them my favourites for the cup. They were that good, but obviously that's potentially me overreacting to one weekend. But looking at form wise, they were that good.
I don't disagree with the form and how good they were. To say that they are cup favourites is an incredibly bold shout, but that's what this podcast is for, is bold opinions. Tactically, I thought it was fascinating, and I think there's more that meets the eye with West Bromwich Albion. We've spoken a lot about their system. I wouldn't categorise it as a true 4-out. And to quote David D, the 3 3/4 is probably a more accurate representation of the tactical approach. That second pivot sits high around the halfway line, but isn't always actively engaged in the build-up. It's only when Chris Gordon is the deepest of the 4 players that you see the full confidence of recycling play, going backwards in order to build forwards. I don't think they quite have the confidence when Lucas Christa or Zach Dickey operates in that second pivot role, that they want to go back. But as we've spoken about at length, Chris Gordon is world class in that role, unique in that role. And there isn't another player in the country who executes it at this level. And that's what we saw in Gameweek 5, and exactly why he's one of the first names on Adam McAvoy's team sheet and Gregg's fantasy team sheet. He was so good in Gameweek 5. Everything Albion did flowed through him. The tempo, the control, the decision-making, starting the process for the inside pickoffs, which is something that Charlie and I have spoken about at length. And it's something that was central to their success across Gameweek 5. And just to kind of break down the inside pickoffs, for me, it's like a 3-stage operation. It's the first pivot, so typically Chris in the centre. He will fire a ball almost centrally down the court, often towards an opponent rather than a teammate. Then it's entirely on the winger, in this case, either Brad Bates or Zach Dickey, having that anticipation, the angle, the timing, the bravery to drive head on to the ball, often so close to the opposition. So if ball contact isn't inevitable, chair contact with the opponent is. So it's either a nice crisp pass or it's a foul. But then the big distinguishing factor is the third part of that operation is the receiver. Whether it's the alternate winger or going back to one of the pivot plays, they have to be ready to receive and capitalise. And this weekend they was. So it would go Chris centrally, inside pick-off from Brad, who was probably the standout of it. And then Zach Dickey there at the back post was ready to score, ready to recycle play. And when it worked, it was unstoppable. Watch that Teesside game back. Brad Bates and Zach Dickey executed it to perfection, Brad in particular. And to Charlie's point, that's the best I've seen of Brad since his time at Aspire. He hasn't been able to replicate it in a West Bromwich Albion shirt since he rejoined the side. But if it wasn't the inside pickoffs, it was the 180s. They're not just clean contact. They are consistently finding their targets, and that is the distinction. You can, if you're a wide player, you can connect all day long, but if you are not directing it with intent, it means nothing. And this weekend, everything that Brad did had a purpose. Zach Dickey, that's the best version we've ever seen of him. He does look more measured and quiet compared to the USA version we've seen in the past. It's something you've spoken about before, Gregg. Muted, relatively speaking. But he's coming into the most complex system in the league, arguably in the world, often with just a single training session beforehand. And essentially, he's having to learn it in live competition. It's an incredibly steep learning curve, and it's almost impossible, yet he's producing. The goal was the creativity, the combinations, fully deserved his inclusion in the fantasy team of the weekend. And it's a conversation I had with him about his potential selection for the US national side. He is pushing for a recall to Tracy Mayr's squad. And this version of Zach is definitely in the conversation. However, his classification plays a huge factor into that, because they have Riley, arguably their best player, one of the best in the world as a PF2. They've got Pete Winslow, who possesses one of the most unique skills anywhere on the planet in his dead ball delivery. Another two. And then two players that we've raved about in David Dowling and Michael Rayton, also PF2s. So the question of Tracy Mayr is, because he's probably only going to take 4-2s, maybe 5, and then Zach may have a chance. But if they do commit to 4-2s, Zach has the odds stacked up against him. But for me, I take him to Argentina. If not for the levels he's showing currently, then for the character and everything he brings off the court. It's an interesting debate. Do you have any thoughts? Because we're not necessarily privy to national team squad selections because it's so far away. We don't know how they perform in training, in camps, within the domestic season over in the US. But I don't know. Do you take experience or do you take raw potential?
What I was about to say is that you taking 4-2s or is that you taking 5-2s?
Assume you're taking 4-2s. Does Zach feature as one of them?
Well, for you, he does. I'm just intrigued as to which.
You're Tracy Mayr. Do you pick Zach for your US squad? It's not a difficult question.
No. I was asking you the debate about which two you don't take if you're taking Zach. Is what I was asking.
We haven't seen a great deal of Michael Rayton, and a lot of players and individuals in and around the US rave about him and his potential. You was the first person to make us aware of his level, Gregg, when you played up against him at St George's Park. David Dowling is a non-negotiable, as is Riley and Pete. So for me, it's Michael or it's Zach. And again, do you go with experience, character, or do you go with raw potential?
It's a tough one. I don't envy Tracy Mayr the slightest. It's hard to judge, isn't it? Because we're so close to Zach this season. Get to see him up close. And I think the version we saw of Zach in this weekend is definitely knocking on the door, like seriously close. I just think they like the potential, and I again really rate Michael Rated so highly. He was really so good against us last year. He has the character, I think, as well. I don't think his character's too far off Zach's. I think most characters in that US squad are very similar. So I think, yeah, it's a really unenviable task. But Zach has shown his ability. If the US want to move towards more of a attacking passing style that they said they did last year, then you think you've got to take Zach, haven't you, for that experience he's got with West Brom, Charlie?
Yeah, it's a tough one because, I think of a squad of a starting four of Jordan Dickey, Riley Johnson, David Dowling, and Zach Dickey. And that's ridiculous, isn't it? But you can't do it because of classification. But I would, love to see that team play together because I think they'd be amazing. I, to be honest, don't feel qualified to comment on it. But again, I don't know about you guys. There's always debate about England. I don't even feel qualified to comment on England's selection because so little of what we actually see is what's taken into consideration. Like I feel like a lot more stock is put into how the players perform in these private England camps, in these friendlies, in training with the national team, the National League football, because there's so many players that look incredible in the National League that can't replicate it at an England scale and may not be able to replicate it at an England scale. The pressure and the system and the environment is so different that I always feel like I have to be very tentative when I'm talking about national squad selection. So I don't envy Tracy Mayer at all. Because it's going to be a tough decision. He clearly rates Michael Rayton. He started him in the final of the America's Cup. That isn't as if he's a fringe player. He got started in the final, so he's quite a big player. Obviously David Dowling for me is non-negotiable. Zach's given himself a good chance. I hope that the Americans look favourably upon him coming to play in England. I feel like sometimes there can be a bit of weirdness when players go and play in other leagues, and there's a bit of like animosity towards that. But we do have the best national league in the world by a long way. Like it's not even close. And so I hope that they've realised that all he's done by coming over here is improve himself and get a greater understanding. And there'll be things that he can share with the American national team about England that will be useful to them as well, because he's played against Tyler Reeve and Ethan Fisher and these kind of players that a lot of the American squad won't have had a huge amount of time playing against that could be big characters at this upcoming World Cup. So yeah, I think Zach Dickey could be sort of secret agent Dickey if he ends up back in that squad, reporting back about the happenings here in England. But no, I've really enjoyed watching him play in England, and regardless of what happens, whether we see him at the World Cup or not, he's a fantastic player, and maybe we'll see him in England again at some point. If West Brom have a chance to and do well in the cup and are really enjoying the way it's going with the squad, who knows? Maybe he'll come back and play a second season with West Brom. We just don't know.
Yeah, exactly that. But I think it's a nice problem for Tracy Mayer to have, just as we'll come on to talk about Adam McAvoy and how there is an abundance of options beyond the 8 that we currently deem to be the senior side. So very intriguing. But yeah, Zach Dickey hasn't hurt his chances at all to experience a different league, a different country. And as mentioned, this is the best version, I think, in terms of technical and tactical work that we've ever seen from him. If we're just looking once again at West Bromwich Albion and the other players, I think Harry Beswick is starting to slowly to grow into his role. The system looked fairly alien to him earlier in the season, but you're seeing that understanding build. Ollie Rock, similar, although he has been there for quite some time now. So probably want to see him start to be really effective with those inside pickoffs and 180s. Matt Gilbert, as always, reliable, consistent, but maybe quieter this season, getting less minutes than he would have potentially have liked. Lucas Chrysler deserves real credit. Quietly becoming a really important part of this team. The relationship he has with Chris Gordon is growing. He's clearly trusted in the big games. He's calmer now. He's more mature, a real difference from his time at St George's Knights and West Bromwich Albion Throstles. And that development is key if Albion are to push forward. But zooming out, the bigger questions are still there, because despite this level, this quality, this system, they finished 5th, their lowest ever National League finish. And just on Zach Dickey was their top goal scorer with 8 goals. No Albion player hitting double digits for the first time in over a decade, which probably tells you something about output or lack of. So the question becomes, what do they do next season? Because right now it's incredibly effective. And when I say right now, I mean post Gameweek 5. But if they want to be in that same bracket as Leeds, as Aspire, as Teesside, now Greenbank, they need to find another gear, whether that's recruitment or keeping this squad together for that continuity. And I will say, based on Gameweek 5, they have a very good shout in the Cup. Certainly much better than what we would have said coming into Gameweek 5. So it's not an overly outrageous shout from Gregg, because the version we saw against Leeds and Teesside does challenge anyone in the division or in the Cup for that matter. So congratulations to them. Let's now progress. Next in the standings, in 4th, we've got Greenbank finishing on 48 points, just one adrift of Teesside in 3rd. And I think it's fair to say they gave the title race a really good go this season, but ultimately ran out of momentum in Gameweek 4, which left them with too much ground to make up heading into the final set of fixtures. That context probably plays into how we assess Gameweek 5, because whilst the results are mixed, there are still some standout moments, starting with one of the most extraordinary scorelines we've seen in quite some time, a 14-0 win over GBG Knights. Marcus Harrison in particular was the standout. Once he sensed the opportunity, he went for it. 6 goals in that game, which not only took him to 19 for the season, which was one behind top goal scorers, he also set a new record for Greenbank for most goals in a single match. It's also the first time anyone has scored 6 in a Premiership game since Ed Common did in 2023. And remarkably, it's the 4th time Marcus Harrison has hit 6 or more in a match across his career, which speaks to his impact across the years. Alongside that, Torbjorn Krarup added 4 goals, the first time an overseas player has scored 4 in a WFA match. And Jacob Book Platt, who even gave up penalty duties in that game, still reached a major milestone. His 50th career goal, all for Greenbank, marking him as their record goal scorer. They followed that up with a 2-0 win over Middlesbrough. And I'll be honest, this one wasn't pretty. It never is between those two sides. They cancel each other out stylistically. Torbjorn Krarup opened the scoring from an indirect free kick. One of the simplest goals he'll score all season. Borough just sat off before Marcus Harrison added a trademark late dribble and finish to seal it. Then Sunday saw a 0-0 draw with Teesside. Interestingly, probably a result that suited Greenbank more than it did the reigning champions at the time. It also continues a record. Greenbank still haven't beaten Teesside in 8 attempts, including 4 in the league. And one of the only sides they've faced frequently that they haven't yet been able to beat. And then to close the weekend, a 3-0 defeat to Aspire, their most comprehensive loss of the season, and one in truth. They just got the game plan wrong. Looked like the side had run out of all energy. So when you step back, 2 wins, a draw and a defeat, it's solid, but not enough to bridge the gap to those above them. Gregg, you to begin here. Give me your assessment from Greenbank, because again, like so many others, it depends what lens you look at it through. Did they overachieve, challenging right towards the end, or would you have liked to have seen them sustain that across the 5 weekends?
Bit of both, I suppose. I think they'd be quite pleased with where they ended up. 4th, 48 points. really establish themselves in the title race. They'll look back at the defeat to Throttles as the one key moment in the season that really ended up counting them out a lot more. So if they say that they have that 3 points coming to the weekend, they're top of the table, and then they really have something to go for, having played obviously a game more than the other 3 title challengers coming into the weekend. The Aspire game, they knew they were out of it, so they tried something in the game that obviously didn't mean anything for them, and it didn't work. Fair enough. They were really poor in that first half, and Aspire put them to the sword. They reverted back to their normal strength in the second half and were much better. So I don't really put too much stock into that result. From my point of view, they're really solid, aren't they? They're serious. Like Jacob Butt has become one of the best young players in the league. You could see the impact that Marcus Harrison's coaching has had on him. Marcus Harrison is just Marcus Harrison, isn't he? He's just very good, ridiculously good at the sport. Loves to dribble and bully his way through players, but obviously he's ridiculously good in the passing game as well. And Torbjörn Kraut just obviously became a player that Marcus could depend on, whether it be filling in that role in the middle behind Jacob, whether it be switching out onto the wing a little bit when Marcus comes into the middle, or Jacob pushes forward and Luke Kelly drops back. He's filled in, I think, every single position for Greenback this season. And Luke Kelly's there to score chances when he gets them. Is often left as that really isolated high winger, allowing Crarup, Harrison, and Butt to do all the defensive nitty gritty work. But he will sit back for sometimes set pieces or corners and mop up any danger that comes his way, and is no stranger to scoring goals at all. And Ellie Curran just comes on when she gets an opportunity, enjoys the football clearly, enjoys playing for Greenbank, plays with a smile on her face, which is just great to see. So yeah, really solid. I'll be pleased with the season they've had. Obviously still in the cup and got a good chance of winning that. And they'll just think about 1 or 2 missed opportunities. But you can't really complain, I think, from a Greenback point of view. They've put themselves right amongst their title challenges.
Yeah, I mean, Greenbank going into that Aspire game, last game of the weekend, if they beat Aspire, would have finished second in the table. So would have been a really appealing table for them. I thought they were okay through the weekend. I think the Saturday games, obviously, they just did what they needed to do. Against Teesside, I think it was 2 sides that weren't really anywhere near their best, 2 sides that were really disappointing across the weekend. And I think you guys sort of cancelled each other out. And then the Aspire game, yeah, they were trying something. I don't really know why they became so poor from what they were trying, because it's not as if they were trying to play like a 4 out with Marcus in goal or anything. All they did was sort of swap the goalkeeper shirt from Jacob Butt to Toby Crarup. I don't think it changes a huge amount, to be honest, but they were very, very weak at the back, and Aspire capitalised and 3-0, but it could have been 5 or 6 really. I think they'll look back on the season as one of growth. That maybe it will be the one that got away for them in some way, but to be honest, I don't think they were good enough to win the league this season. Like, yes, they can point at the Throttles result, but they also lost to Teesside earlier on in the season. Obviously, got beat by Aspire this weekend. Lost to Leeds in Gameweek 4, so they weren't quite as good as Leeds this season. Just that's a fact. And although they did drop some silly points, they can't really blame anything but them just not being quite good enough this season on them not winning the title. Next year will be different, and I'm sure they'll try and find a way to grind out results. But I can see them needing sort of that one more player, that one more bit of depth. something a bit different, because I feel like with Greenbank, they don't really have anybody that they could bring on to unlock a game if that starting four is not quite clicking. I don't know where they go. I don't know what their impact is off the bench. Ellie's, really enjoying her football and is a great person to have around the squad, but she's not quite up to the level of the rest of them and not quite up to the level of a title race. So I think they are probably a player short right now of really challenging, but that might just be me because of this season.
I think it's fair to remember these are the only side to beat Leeds all season. You have to drop that in there.
Twice, once in the league, once in the cup.
Yeah, true.
But this, as we will reference with Teesside and Aspire, the division wasn't determined by one-off games. It was determined by a season. And on their day, Greenbank can beat anyone, but so can Newcastle, so can West Bromwich Albion. And I've got some interesting points to raise regarding Leeds in a little bit. But on Greenbank, statistically, it's a strong season. 14 clean sheets, joint third best in the division alongside Leeds, averaging 2.27 goals per game. And yes, that is very much inflated by that 14-0 win, but still respectable across the campaign. I agree completely with Charlie. I still think they're one piece short of really challenging. Starting four, they can match anyone. But when you look beyond that, the drop-off from the bench in comparison to the other title challenges isn't quite there. And when you compare it with Leeds, who we'll come on to, it wasn't necessarily the starting four that won them the title. It was the depth and ability to change games off the bench with one person in particular. Individually, Marcus Harrison finishes on 19 goals, 15 assists, which is pretty incredible output. What's even more impressive is he's now recorded double-digit figures in every single league season since the current two-division structure came in. No one else has done that, so that level of consistency at the top is ridiculous. Torbjorn Krarup, massive credit needed as well. The commitment to play domestically across Denmark and England, alongside his international commitment, is relentless. I think he said to me at the conclusion of the weekend, he's played 38 domestic games this season across the two countries, which is mental when you think about it. And by the end of Sunday, you could see it. He looked drained. But his impact across the season has been huge. Goals, movement, unpredictability. He's perfectly suited to how Greenbank play. On to Jacob Buck-Platt. I think there's a real opportunity with Greenbank, because when Greenbank play more expansively, and I'm referencing that GBG game, which I know there's context to be considered, you saw glimpses of something different with Jacob, who was operating as the first and second pivot at times, comfortable receiving, recycling, creating angles. And that's what I always say about kind of a true 4-out system. It's not about having four players in attack. It's about having the confidence to go back in order to go forwards. Very few players do that consistently, which is why we keep coming back to the conversation about who replaces Chris Gordon in that English system. People instinctively go to Ethan Fisher, but stylistically, he's much closer to John Bolden than he is Chris Gordon. Even if he does wear the goalkeeper shirt in an England shirt, he wears the England shirt in the England squad. Jacob, however, at times shows glimpses of being that Chris Gordon-esque first pivot, second pivot, as does Ollie Crawshaw, but it's not consistent. And until Greenbank evolve and look to play football in that particular fashion, Jacob's development might be stunted slightly, or his ticket to the England senior team may be delayed slightly, because like Ollie Crawshaw and others, he's almost destined to get there.
I was speaking to Marcus about this at the weekend. Interestingly, he says he'd like to play Jacob out wide.
If that's going to be the case, he needs to do it then.
Yeah, they're obviously working with personnel they've got at the minute, and they want to recruit to be able to do that is what their issue is at the minute. But their ideal, I think Marcus's ideal plan is to play Jacob out wide and have a all-playing goalkeeper in behind.
I'm not sure that I've seen enough of Jacob in a wide area to suggest that's his best position. I love Jacob centrally because I think he's got the mind for it, and he's like that metronomic style player. Temperamentally, I see him more as a central player. And I mean, if we're talking purely England, the centre areas are the ones where potentially there's going to be spots available in the coming years. I mean, not that I'm wishing John Balding or Chris Gordon to retire. Quite the opposite. Of course, we want them to stay for as long as possible. But the wings are looking a little bit locked down in an England system at the minute, for at least the next few years. If they do want to break into the England squad, I think that goalkeeper position could be the best route for both Jacob Buckler and Ollie Gorshaw.
Yeah, and this is where we go back to the question about versatility. Does it help or hinder at club level? But just to go back to Jacob Buckler in terms of his attacking output, I referenced the 23-24 championship where Greenbank were crowned champions. In that season, he did play an attacking wide role. And in that season, he got 21 goals and 33 assists. Over 50 goal contributions. And again, I understand the difference in level, but Jacobs has settled in the Premiership. But this uncertainty from Marcus Harrison into where he's going to play Jacob will be picked up on by the England coaches. So if they have a direction for Jacob, they need to implement it soon. Maybe even in the cup when people can see it. Because the more he wears that goalkeeper shirt, the more we compare him to Chris rather than the likes of Ed, Marcus, Dylan, Dan, the wingers currently in the England senior side. But I agree with Charlie's point that the spaces within the England team are going to appear centrally, certainly when you're referencing the next 2-3 years, because as we will come on to, no one at the moment is coming close to Dylan and or Dan as the two wingers on either side. But overall, it's very exciting. It was a genuine title challenge, but falling just short. And if they can add that extra piece to the puzzle, whether it's depth, tactical flexibility, whether it's a new signing in that goalkeeper role, which allows them to take the shackles off Jacob, so to speak. I'm very excited for them in 26-27. Let's now progress. In third, we've got reigning champions Teesside and a return of just 5 points from a possible 12 in Gameweek 5, which, relatively speaking, has to be one of their lowest accumulations across a weekend in quite some time. There were signs in Game Week 4 that things were starting to slow slightly, and unfortunately the quick turnaround in those 2 weekends carried into this, and from the very first whistle they just didn't quite look themselves or up to the race. They opened with a 1-0 defeat to West Bromwich Albion. And as mentioned, whilst the scoreline doesn't suggest, the scoreline suggests a tight game, the reality was very different. Albion were dominant, and that could have easily been 3, 4, even 5. Teesside just couldn't find rhythm at all. Front bumpers, 180s, positioning, communication, all slightly below the standard we've come to expect. It's probably the most un-Teesside performance I've seen in quite some time. I did miss a 0-0 with Aspire, just to note. They responded with a 2-1 win over Newcastle United Foundation, but even in that, as mentioned, Newcastle had goals disallowed. They created chances, arguably could have taken something from the game. So whilst it's 3 points, it wasn't a convincing performance. And then Sunday, with the title effectively out of reach, a 0-0 draw with Greenbank before a 1-1 draw with champions now Leeds. So overall, it's not a disastrous season, finishing third in arguably what we will probably unanimously say is the most competitive Premiership season we've ever had. But when you're reigning champions, you just have to give a little bit more in the latter stages. I'll come to you second, Greg. I'll go to Charlie first.
I really didn't see this coming. I really thought Teesside would go on and win the league this weekend. I really thought that, and they just showed up and were just really poor, like really poor. Like we saw a little crack in sort of the window when they dropped points to Villa earlier on in game week 4, and we thought, oh well, I guess gods do bleed it because they'd looked so perfect all season, Teesside. And then the window just shatters on Saturday, and the football from Teesside was turgid at times. Like, based on their very high standards, I must say, all of this is in relation to how good they usually are. But they just didn't know that they were going to score. Like, the Newcastle game, obviously, was a bit different, but against Aspire and against West Brom, this free-flowing attacking side that took the league by storm last season and that, beat Aspire 3-0 on West Brom 2-0 on that Saturday morning of game week 5 to solidify the title, they were just nowhere to be seen. Absolutely nowhere to be seen. It was a really cool weekend, but by Teesside standards, and actually by the standards of any side pushing for the title, 5 points from 12, when you know that you basically need 10 from 12 to win the title, maybe would have been okay. But 5 points from 12 is nowhere near the standard. And this is the thing with Teesside. We said all season, it's a very different equation for them this year because unlike last season where they were sort of the shock factor and it was them against sort of the world and they were the public favourite to win the league and it was all sort of exciting. There was less buzz around Teesside this year and it was now right Teesside. Now it's time to be that heavy hitter, that team that shows up every weekend and performs. And it was a weird watching Teesside this weekend. Like it felt like they regressed back to like 23, 24 when they weren't even really in the title race, and they end the season, 5 points behind Leeds top, or is it 6? Let me just check. 6 points behind Leeds top of the table. Which, if anyone had said that going into the weekend, I think there would have been quite a little shock around that. So yeah, very strange. Fantastic group of players, fantastic team. But for whatever reason, since sort of that Sunday morning of game week 4, the baby's gone out with the bathwater a little bit. And I mean, Gregg's probably the best person to ask about what's gone wrong, really, because they've gone from looking so strong and looking like they're going to defend their title magnificently to all of a sudden just looking anything but, really.
Well, I appreciate you boys make it sound better than it was because it wasn't 5 points from 12, it was 5 points from 15. So you've done us a favour there, boys. Cheers. Yeah, no, I can't. I can make no excuses. It was poor Saturday. We all know that. We're not naive to the fact that we weren't good enough. Especially going forward, I don't think the Aspire draw was too disappointing for a first game Saturday, to be honest. Because whilst we struggled going forwards, I certainly from a goalkeeping point of view, yes, Aspire had more territory and possession, but I didn't feel overly threatened too many times, to be perfectly honest. I didn't feel forced into making too many like last-ditch saves. So I think a 0-0 draw was a fair result in that game. Yeah, but then the West, obviously we've spoken about West Brom and how good they were, but our attacking play just didn't come through at all. West Brom were by far the better team, and it could have been 3 or 4, to be perfectly honest. So to come away with just a 1-0 defeat flattered us slightly. We had moments of, and especially again that Spire game, we had moments where we had a spell of 5 or 10 minutes where we were on top a little bit, but just never really created anything. The Newcastle game, yes, we won, but again, we weren't at our best. Certainly, there was some free flowing football, and the goals we did score were nice, but Newcastle were more than a threat to us at the back. And arguably, to be honest, that is the one game I felt most threatened the entire weekend was the Newcastle game. They could have easily obviously had the goal disallowed, which I'm quite relieved about because I've made a mistake with the second one. So I was quite relieved when the whistle went for a 2-on-1. And then they could have easily got an equaliser at the end, because it's one of those games where I said to Tyler with a couple of minutes left, I was like, right, we're not playing well today, but we are 2-1 up. Let's just try and get out of this with a win. And we still, to our credit, we threw some players forward, trying to get more goals to try and reinvigorate ourselves. But it wasn't working, and it left us open at the back. And then Sunday was better. It was better by what we did on Saturday. The Greenbank game was, again, a fair result, a 0-0. Because, again, we struggled to create some chances going forwards, but we were better in terms of our defensive shape and build up. We had some moments, and we had to deal with, obviously, the strength of Marcus Harrison in the dribble, despite him saying that it was horrific defending from me. You can't push through a chair to score a goal, Marcus. And in Leeds, I think you saw that the pressure was off. Like, we were officially out of it at that point. And we played so much better in the first half, especially. Yes, Leeds were sort of taking their foot off the gas a little bit, because they were pretty much, apart from some horrific goal different swing, they were going to win the league regardless. But we were so much better. We were open. We were, from both pickoffs were on. We were connecting with our 180s. We were using the space given by Leeds because they want to play attacking football. It was a really enjoyable game to play. Really enjoyable game to be a part of. There was a nice celebratory atmosphere because obviously Leeds were going to win the league. And we felt like, I don't know if the pressure got to us a little bit, because obviously there wasn't that pressure last year, like Charlie says. But that Leeds game just showed what we can do with the freedom. And maybe that's something we have to work on for next season and the Cup in a couple of weeks. But yeah, a poor weekend by our standards, obviously. We make no bones about that. But enjoyable season. And obviously we've got some individual accolades. Mitch Tinkler finished joint top goal scorer. Tyler Reeve with the most assists. I did nearly eat my words. Jeff Lewis reminded me on the Championship podcast last week. I said about Villa Rockets Lions, how could a team finish with the top goal scorer and the top assister and finish fourth? And if we'd have lost to Leeds, there was a danger we might have done the exact same thing. Fortunately, we didn't, and we didn't become the first team to win the league and then lose 5 games in the following season, because if we'd lost to Leeds, that would have happened as well. So we showed some character, individual moments to be proud of, because we're a team with fantastic players. We just fell short, and it is what it is. But make no bones about it.
Challenging for the title, faltering at the final hurdle, and then once the pressure is off and that title is out of reach, you play with freedom and flexibility. That sounds very similar to Teesside Steel in the Championship, because that's essentially how their season played out. We
said this at training. We're like, it's weird. We both had those very similar seasons in the fact that we've not really all season played it our best football, but we've still somehow been in touch with challenging for titles and, well, Teesside Steel's case, promotion. So I think it speaks positively to us as a club that we can not play our best and still be relatively close to a title race. Obviously, this weekend didn't go as well as we would have liked, but the potential is there for us. We know how good we are on our day, and we know when we get it right, we play arguably the best football in the division. Obviously, I'm going to say that because I'm biased, but we saw it last season, didn't we? And at times this season. But yeah, we have the mix of experience and Ed Common, who showed in that Leeds game his ability, because his goal is unbelievable.
It certainly is, and I'd recommend anyone go back and watch it. For me, there were 2 main themes that defined your season: execution and predictability. If we're talking about execution, the key players just weren't at their usual level. Mitch Tinkler, who still finishes as joint top goal scorer, also becoming just the 9th player in the current 12-team era to hit 20-plus goals in consecutive Premiership seasons. He had chances across the weekend, but just didn't convert in the way we've come to expect. Ed Common, largely nullified, and that's rare. It's also worth noting that across his entire career, he's only failed to hit double digits in a league season twice, one of which was the shortened COVID season. So it shows the standards he set. But this weekend, and maybe even season as a whole, he just couldn't impose himself as we've come to expect. Tyler Reeve, frustration was clear, which in turn probably affected his level. However, statistically, still an outstanding season in terms of output. 20 assists, playmaker of the season, paired with 13 goals. But this weekend, again, the influence just wasn't quite what we've come to expect from him. And then Gregg, yourself, we've seen your impact and out wide, but with Alistair Hay unavailable, you were locked into that goalkeeper position across the weekend, which limits your ability to affect games. And Teesside are so reluctant to have any sort of bravery with committing that goalkeeper forward, which means you're watching the majority of all the games and not necessarily contributing to it. And I'm not saying you have to play 4-out football, but when you know you have to chase games and games are escaping you, the title is escaping you. If you could do it again, would you not just be a little bit braver? That would be the question I pose of the coaches more than the players. And then the second point about predictability, something Charlie and I have discussed, maybe you can provide somewhat of an insight, is the goal kicks. And it's not necessarily exclusive to Teesside. A few teams across the National League do it, but it's the reluctance for the goalkeeper to take the goal kick. And instead, the central player takes them with the goalkeeper sitting directly behind. Immediately, you reduce your attacking options from 3 to 2. And the opposition are allowed to overload your strongest players. So at Teesside goal kicks, the strongest option to fire it towards is Ed Common. The opposition can double up. And with Teesside, where there is so much built around Mitch and Ed carrying that ball and driving it becomes incredibly restrictive. And now in a league where every team has access to hours and hours of footage, that pattern has been picked up on. So now opposition know how to set up to stop it. And I don't know, it's something that completely takes momentum out of Teesside's favour. I understand it used to work because they are so strong in the dribble, but now opposition players know how to set up and where to put their chairs to ensure that they receive possession immediately from goal kicks. Is that fair, or is there more that meets the eye?
No, it was certainly fair in the Aspire game, especially. It was just continual. I think it worked again. I think we was more down to execution more than idea this weekend with a lot of it, because it worked in the Leeds game a lot better than it did, like I say, in the Aspire game, because we were just making the runs that we needed to and timing the passes. It is a debate to be had, obviously, because you just immediately are allowing the team you're playing to just push up and pen you in, and it relies on you being first to that ball every single time. And we just weren't enough this weekend. But like I said, it worked against Leeds a bit more. So there's tweaks to be made. Obviously, we'll go back and we'll look at it, and we've got a couple of weeks to play against play in the cup. But it was 50-50 for me.
Yeah, I think it's more just like, to me, when a team takes goal kick, it's like it screams just a lack of sort of trust in the goalkeeper to be able to find that pass. And, you know, Gregg, you back yourself to, obviously, you back yourself to make that pass and, you know, fire it into an area it needs to be in. it's just being a bit braver. I think it's almost like when I see teams taking goal kicks like that, I feel like they've got the handbrake on. And it wasn't a weekend for Teesside to play with the handbrake on. And I think that applies to a lot of actually the football that Teesside played this weekend. Is there was a hesitance to fully commit. I think you could probably say the same thing about Aspire in the earlier games as well. But I think Leeds were the team that were really sort of this season have taken the handbrake off at times, and that's probably what's seen them right at the top. I think there are elements of it, like the goal kick thing was so frustrating because I was watching it and thinking, if you have a setup where you've got the options of Tyler Reeve, Mitch Tinkler, and Ed Clement, and you've got a goalkeeper who's played for England and who should be like competent enough to, get the ball forward with a bit of power on it. That's so scary for a team to face. But because you've got Tyler and he's only really got the options of playing to Ed or to Mitch, it's like all they have to do, because all you're hoping for, I guess, is Ed or Mitch to be able to dummy the ball or do something a bit special and get the ball out wide or get it central. But regardless of whether there's, well-timed runs or anything, if a player just parks behind Ed or Mitch, they can't do anything because they try and let the ball run through and it just gets stopped. And it also allows them, the middle player of the opposition, to just fully drop off. And if the ball does get played centrally, just mop it up and restart an attack of their own. It was a really frustrating thing to watch with Teesside this weekend. And I really do think that it's something that has to be looked at from a Teesside perspective, because you've got, it's not as if you've not got the players to do it, you've got the players to be brave from these situations, and you're just not doing it for whatever reason.
And just to add, this isn't a Gameweek 5 problem. This is something Charlie and I discussed, I think, after Gameweek 3. And just to add and reiterate, it did work once upon a time. And with Mitch and with Ed dummying and using their chair shape to fool the opposition, they're two of the better players in the country at it. But as Charlie said, players know where to position their chairs now, where that is just not an option.
I don't think it was to do with playing with a handbrake on. I think it was more execution this game week. To be perfectly honest, I hear your points about obviously me taking goal kicks, and we're not going to get really started podcast about Teesside, just how we do goal kicks. I'm not the Teesside spokesperson, but I think it's more to do with execution than anything else. Like I said, when it worked against Leeds, it worked. Driving on it, front bumpering through the gap, and then the other wingers making a run. Yes, it can become predictable, and we'd have to look at that. But it's just one of those, you're not going to win every game, every season. Yes, we were poor. It is what it is. Leeds were deserving champions. Make no bones about that for me. We go again next season with the same quality squad we have, with the abundance of talent we have available.
Yeah, exactly that. And just in elite sport, and this is elite sport, predictability can undo even the best teams. We've seen it historically with sides that dominate for years. Eventually, they need to evolve, and maybe this is the push that Teesside need, because when you compare them to the other title challenges, Leeds, Aspire, even Greenbank, they've all adapted or refreshed in some way over the last 18 months. Teesside, by contrast, I think their last change was bringing you in for, was it 23-24 your first season?
No, last season was my first.
Last season was your first.
Last season was my first season for Teesside, yeah, 24-25.
So they haven't altered since 23-24 is kind of what I'm going with. So when it works, it's brilliant. But when it doesn't, there's no alternative gear. And I think that's the next step, whether that's development, recruitment, tactical evolution, something to create competition and unpredictability. Because there's another thing I reference often within the squad is when positions are guaranteed, even subconsciously, it can impact the hunger and the intensity. And again, I'm not saying that's the case here, but it's something all top teams have to consider. If you're a player for Teesside, are you looking over your shoulder at a young, hungry youngster or fringe player waiting to take your place? And that isn't necessarily the case which means there's a degree of comfort in and amongst the squad and no jeopardy. But that said, it's still a very good side and a very good season. 2.45 goals per game, second only to Leeds, 15 clean sheets, which is outstanding. Joint top goal scorer, top assister, and yet finishing third. And that's pretty crazy when you come to think about it. The Premiership title may be gone, but the season is not over. The cup is still there. And if there's one thing you know about Teesside, they have the quality to bounce back, but it might just need a reset, a refresh, and a rethink ahead of 26-27. We are now on to the penultimate team in the division. It goes without saying that this is the longest podcast we've ever done. I think we're well over 3 hours at this point. So if you're still with us, a huge thank you. Aspire in second, and it feels very strange saying this out loud. The Invincibles, unbeaten across all 22 league games, and yet they finish as runners-up. A 25-game unbeaten run stretching beyond this season. The first side to go an entire Premiership campaign unbeaten since they did it themselves in 2015-16. And remarkably, the first ever to do it and not win the title. That probably tells you everything about just how competitive this season has been. Defensively, they have been nothing short of exceptional. Just 3 goals conceded across the entire campaign. The best defensive record we've seen since Northern Thunder in 2016-17. And it's built on that structure in front of Tom Kelly. John Bolden and Dan McLellan have this incredible system that has the defensive screens. They control the space, they limit the opportunities, to the point where more often than not, the opposition don't even get close to testing Tom Kelly as the most defensive of the 4 players. And that's probably the biggest compliment you can give the system. But then you look at Gameweek 5, and it's ultimately a weekend that defines the narrative of their season. They opened with a 0-0 draw against Teesside, and in hindsight, that's the one. Given how Teesside performed across the weekend, Aspire may well look back on and feel they showed them a little bit too much respect. 3 points there, and the title picture looks very different. Then a 0-0 draw with Leeds, again, a game where arguably they were the more progressive side, asking more questions, but just couldn't find that breakthrough. And from there, once the title had all but slipped out their hands, they responded emphatically. A 3-0 win over Sevenoaks, a 4-0 win against Villa, and a 3-0 win over Greenbank. A statement end to the season, but ultimately just too late to impact the title race. Charlie, give me your assessments, please.
I think, obviously, unbeaten first team not to win the league is unlucky. But I don't think, to be honest, that tells the full story, because while they're unbeaten, they get the season does sort of come down to slip ups. I think, rather than games between the top teams themselves. Like last season, for example, Teesside won the league because of the games against Aspire and West Brom. In the final game week, they beat Aspire and West Brom. Earlier on in the season, they battered Aspire. That was why they won, because they asserted their dominance over those teams at the top of the table with them. For Aspire, Leeds, Teesside this season, and I'll throw Greenbank in there too, there's not been a huge amount of beating each other. Teesside and Leeds drew on both occasions. Aspire and Leeds drew on both occasions. Aspire and Teesside drew once, and Aspire won once. So there's not been a huge amount of clear results in that title race. Teesside have had their slip-ups. Teesside obviously slipped up against Villa, against West Brom in the final game week. Aspire had Middlesbrough, where they drew 0-0, and West Brom. And Leeds just haven't had those results at all. They've been pretty much flawless outside of playing against the teams in the top 4 with them. And that's what ultimately, that consistency and that ability to show up in every single game and have the foot fully, pedal to the metal in every single game has ultimately meant that Leeds have just managed to edge it out. And it's a point between them. I think the Aspire Teesside game, I think Aspire, well, I recorded the Aspire podcast on Monday night and they did feel they showed too much respect to Teesside. They were expecting to come up against that Teesside of champions of last season. And I think had the fixtures had been flipped around, let's say Aspire played Sevenoaks first game of the Saturday and Teesside had played Newcastle first game of the Saturday, and then it had been West Brom in the middle, and then they'd met last game of the Saturday. I think we would have seen a potentially less conservative approach from Aspire. They wouldn't have protected themselves as much. It wouldn't have been a because they knew that obviously if they lost that game Saturday morning, they were out of it completely, and Teesside were probably the exact same. So I think they probably saw that as let's not lose this game and let's beat Leeds instead, and then that will be the way that we win the title. But I think if they flipped it around, and I think maybe they were expecting Teesside to be a bit stronger than they were, and Teesside were relatively toothless, and I think they would have committed Dan McLellan forward a bit more in that game had they known that Teesside were maybe not firing on all cylinders in an attacking sense. Um, but Aspire can not really feel aggrieved at all that they haven't won it. They didn't deserve to win it based on the draws. Like you say that unbeaten, but it's a drop point 6 times across the season, which is not really title worthy. So they'll be pleased with their performances. They grew on last season, obviously beat last season's point tally, and they're definitely improving. But I think overall it was just a little bit too soon for Aspire, especially in game weeks 2 and 3. They sort of wobbled a bit, whereas game weeks 4 and 5 they were pretty flawless. But before that point, they gave themselves a lot of work to do with dropping points to Middlesbrough and to West Brom.
Yeah, I think it's just like one too many draws, isn't it, for Aspire? That's they've done extremely well to go unbeaten, but just one too many draws has cost them. Like you say, defensively, outstanding. Like Tom Kelly is rarely threatened, but whenever he is called upon, he does his job. I agree with Charlie that if the fixtures had been a little bit different, it might have worked out a little bit differently in the game against us. It might have been, a different mindset, given points on the doors. Obviously from my point of view, I disagree with the fact that I think they showed us too much respect, because I feel like they had possession of territory, and it was fairly obvious pretty early on we weren't at it. So like the first 2 minutes we were under the cosh completely. So I don't think it took a lot of time. It would have taken a lot of time for them to realise, hang on, we've got them here. And like I said, when I was discussing us, I didn't feel too threatened at the back, regardless. So that's just my disagreement there. But after the Leeds game, where Leeds were happier to obviously take a point, it just worked better for them. I feel like a point was a fair result in both of those games. They were exceptional. Their football was outstanding. Dan McLellan was getting assists for days on the Sunday. It was just fantastic to see. And John Dixon's the partnership between those two is blossoming, isn't it? It really is, as two wingers. He is fast becoming one of the better wingers in the division. John Dixon and Dan McLellan, just for someone so young, is just so good. And he's like, this is the level he is now. He's got another 10 years and he still could be the best player in the world at one point, possibly. And that's just his prime. He could go on after that. So yeah, exceptional following that. And they really showed their credentials. The one thing to mention, though, has to be yellow cards, because although I have no idea what the fixture list will be like for 26-27, the yellow card Dan McLellan got in the Greenbank game, when obviously the game meant relatively nothing because the title was already gone, obviously means he's suspended for first game of next season. And it could be that Aspire play Leeds, Teesside, Greenbank, West Brom in that first game, and that could have implications for the rest of the season. So I was in the wars, wasn't I, Charlie, for the that Aspire Teesside game?
Yeah. That was Yeah, that was a weird one because I think it's just sort of something that you're not thinking about suspensions in the last game of the season at all, and it just sort of evades the mind. And then yeah, it was a bit of a niggly game. I think like there was sort of the banter was between John, Dan, and Marcus are really enjoying giving it to each other a little bit in a game that really didn't mean a huge amount, so wasn't going to be overly policed. And yeah, it was silly in the end. Had Dan have known, I'm sure he would have, or probably just taken himself off, to be honest, and not even risked it. He thought that, well, he just didn't think about it. I don't think, but it is what it is. The good thing is the fixture, for Aspire anyway, the fixture grid doesn't have a top four versus top four seeded game in the first round of fixtures, so there's no risk of it being a title decider, but could be uncomfortable. But Aspire will back their squad and back the depth in players like John Dixon to get themselves over the line. So I think it should be absolutely fine.
I really appreciate the assessment from Aspire, because it would be so easy to fall into the trap of saying if that had been a win or if that game had gone differently, things would be different. But it's the butterfly effect, isn't it? One small change alters everything that follows. So there's no guarantee that turning that Teesside draw into a win means that that Leeds game plays out the same way, or that momentum carries across the rest of the weekend. You could even go back across to the Middlesbrough draw as another stalemate across the season. We know that the season isn't defined by one moment; it's defined by all 22 games. And when you look across the full campaign, Aspire ultimately dropped points, I think, in every game week apart from one. And when you're a title challenger, anything other than maximum point is defined as dropping points. So whilst they've been unbeaten, which is incredible and needs to be given so much credit, Leeds were just that little bit more consistent in turning performances into wins, and that was ultimately the difference. But that should take nothing away from what this side has done, because the level of football they've produced, particularly in the second half of the season when it was this re-emergence of John Bolden, it's been some of the best we've ever seen. And just to echo some of your points about the individuals, Dan McLellan, outstanding, 19 goals, 16 assists, his best ever goal scoring season. And it's his all-round game this year that has been exceptional. The link-up play, the creativity, the intelligence, it's been top level, and probably hasn't and won't get the spotlight it deserves because Leeds won the title. Had we seen Aspire lift that trophy on Sunday, there is no world where Dan doesn't sweep up player and young player of the season. But of course, that recency is taken into people's considerations. And I know I've altered the voting system slightly to take into consideration each of the individual game weeks for which he features at the top alongside Ethan Fisher, because it was 3 fantasy team of the weekend inclusions as well as 1 standout inclusion, the exact same as Ethan Fisher. It means he has a very good chance of placing in the player and the young player of the season categories. John Dixon, 18 goals, 12 assists, a brilliant season, including a hat-trick against Villa Rockets. He's first in over 9 years. I think it was for Cheltenham Southwest All-Stars. Bettering his impressive levels from 24-25, and that's exactly what you want to see. Players continue to develop, because that was the difference between Aspire and Teesside. The numbers for Teesside's main squad were lower than their output from their title-winning campaign. John Bolden, when we're talking about output, his goal scoring was less than what we've seen, 6 goals, 11 assists. But as we've said on all of the recap podcasts, it's very reflective of his deeper role within the system. And it's not about volume for the captain. It's about the control and enabling others, because between McLellan and Dixon, they contributed to 37 of Aspire's 48 league goals, which is actually their lowest ever total in a Premiership season. But it highlights how different this Aspire side is. Less explosive, but more controlled, more efficient. Defensively, we've already touched on it. Arguably the best unit we've seen over a full season. So yes, there will be frustration. there has to be to go unbeaten and not win the league, but that should also be of real excitement, because this is still one of the teams to beat. And when you look ahead, particularly to the Cup, that's where it gets interesting, because Leeds have already secured one EPFA Champions Cup spot, winning the league in 25-26. Aspire as holders sadly don't automatically qualify due to the gap between competitions. So if they want to defend that crown, they have to win the Jonga Group WFA Cup on Saturday, May the 9th. But with this system, this structure, this level of control, you wouldn't back or bet against them, it must be said. So they're falling short, but still incredibly capable. And I have no doubt they will do some form of recruitment in the summer to ensure they continue to evolve and keep things fresh. We finally progress to the 25-26 Slater and Gordon Premiership champions at just shy of 3.5 hours. And across the full 22 league game season, it's probably fair to say they were the best side. An 18-game unbeaten run to close out the campaign, 14 wins, 4 draws, their longest ever in the Premiership, though they still fall short of their 32-game unbeaten run they recorded in the Championship between 2016 and 2018. But importantly, it was how they won the games, and it just touches on what Charlie said earlier. 16 wins from 16 games against teams outside the top 4. That's the title race right there. Not necessarily dominance in the head-to-head against the top 4. In fact, I think they only picked up 7 points against the other top 4, fewer than Aspire, but absolute consistency elsewhere. Aspire dropped 4 points in those fixtures. Greenbank dropped 5 points. Teesside 6. Leeds 0. And that's what ultimately crowned them champions. And it was their first ever Premiership title, and they become the first team in history to win the league, having previously been relegated. So that tells you the arc and the development of this group, this history all across the squad. Jack Maxwell, Lewis Harris, Dylan Kelso all lifting the title with a second club, something only a handful of players have ever done. So maybe that mentality and that mindset played into what we saw across Gameweek 5. And Dylan Kelso becoming just the 5th player to win a divisional title with 3 different teams. I think he's done it with St George's Knights, West Bromwich Albion, and now Leeds. Summer Rice becomes the 7th female to win the Premiership. So a really important milestone to note. But from a player's perspective, we've said it all year, no one comes close. A squad packed with current, former, aspiring England internationals, playing a style of football that mirrors the national setup, not quite full 4 out, more that 3.5, 3 3/4 system, but free-flowing, aggressive, powerful. And when they get it right, it's almost impossible to stop. And Gameweek 5 summed that up. They opened with a 4-0 win over West Bromwich Albion. Throssels, that's not easy. A very stubborn defensive side, but Leeds just blew them away. Jack Maxwell with a brace. Should have been a hat-trick, as I'm sure one of you two will go on to mention. Dan Rigby bundled it over the line, but a goal that ultimately secured him that joint top goal scorer award. Dylan Kelso was outstanding throughout, it must be mentioned. 0-0 draw with Aspire, probably the most predictable result. Attack versus defence, but Aspire perhaps the more comfortable side in possession. So a point in hindsight both sides might look back on as being good. A narrow 2-1 win over West Bromwich Albion, a game full of moments and fine margins, a missed penalty and own goal, but Leeds found a way. And you're probably getting that that's the theme, because Sunday against Newcastle, that's where the title was determined. Wave after wave of pressure, but Newcastle stood firm. Ollie Crawshaw versus Ethan Fisher in the centre. 2 players who know each other inside and out, and for large parts, Newcastle held them off. But champions find moments. Corner delivery from Dylan Kelso. Jack Maxwell there once again. Arguably the most important goal in Leeds' history to win them the league. And with it all but wrapped up, they closed with a 1-1 draw against Teesside, champions versus reigning champions. Ed Common strikes first with one of the goals of the season. But Leeds don't panic. They respond, they manage the game, and crucially, they don't give Aspire any opportunity to take it away from them. Another tight encounter between their two sides, as it so often is. Gregg, let's come to you first. You've said pretty much from the first weekend of the season, Leeds are the benchmark, the title favourites, and they proved to be exactly that. Give me your assessments.
Yeah, I've backed Leeds as my favourites all season, for this very, very reason. They have built this squad to be winning titles, whether that be now or as they develop together. But they have, after what was a wobble in game week 1, and everyone went, is this team going to be able to play together and gel? They haven't looked back since, have they? They've been absolutely superb. You say it there. 16 wins from 16 games against teams outside the top 4. That's it. Done. They did not slip up. And this weekend, they showed a champion's mentality, finding ways to win. They dug deep. They had to work for it. That's fair to say, because they were not going to be handed the title. They did what they needed to do. A point in the Aspire game was absolutely fine for them. And then it was a Newcastle game where obviously the pressure, as it got closer to full time, it was still 0-0. The nerves, they knew that they'd be opening the door for Aspire. Aspire were obviously all sat around watching, hoping, praying that Newcastle would hold on. And then Jack Maxwell, I don't think there's probably someone more deserving to get the goal this season than Jack Maxwell. He deserved that moment for the patience he's shown and the ability to just get on with his job whenever he's called upon. He became their hero, their saviour in that game, got the win, and they were able to relax in the Teesside game. Probably too much in the first half, they'll admit. And then second half, I think the draw was a fair result, them getting the goal. It's a brilliant goal, by the way, from Ethan Fisher. He absolutely leathers it. It is superb. It's a goal that is reminiscent of what we've done to many sides, where you play the ball down the line and immediately the player on the line hits a 90-degree spin with absolute force. We had absolutely no chance of saving it. So congratulations to them. Really thoroughly well deserved. Just a squad packed with talent. Dan Rigby making sure he finishes joint top scorer by snatching one from Chad Maxwell. We all had a laugh about that. But yeah, they'll be up there for many of the individual awards at the end of the season, no doubt. But yeah, thoroughly deserving to be champions, and congratulations to them.
Yeah, that poor goal steal was one of the worst I've ever seen. Poor Jack Maxwell, his hat trick got stolen away. Leeds thoroughly deserving champions. I don't want what I said earlier about sort of the fact that the league wasn't won in the big games to come across as a slight, because I honestly find it just as impressive, that 16 out of 16, 100% record against teams outside of the top 4. That is just as impressive a feat to me as if they'd beat Aspire and Teesside in that final weekend and, gone and won the league that way. Because the first of all, the technical strength to be able to get through every game without really having a glove laid on you is one thing, but also the mental strength to get up for every single game and be ready for every single game and just swat teams aside is incredible. They deserve so much credit for that, and I think this is what you get when you have such a motivated squad of young players that just all love playing Powerchair football, that they can be up for every game because they just go out there and just want to prove themselves, and felt like they had a lot to prove this season, each of them individually, and they showed that. Going through their weekend, obviously the win over Throssels is made even more impressive when you put the context of no Ethan Fisher in there because of his suspension. Then against Aspire, they just did what they have to do. When you've got, we spoke earlier about teams burrowing in. When you've got, what a team burrowing in, and they're that physically strong and that organised as Leeds, like, you're going to really struggle to break them down. Aspire will rue that one big chance at the back post, but other than that, it was very solid from Leeds. And then, but by taking a draw on that Aspire game, they also then have fully accepted, right, we're taking this burden upon us. We have to be perfect now for our next 2 games. We can't slip up. And they took a risk by doing that because of the form of West Brom and because Newcastle are a good side, and yet they just stayed composed. Obviously, there's the penalty miss in the West Brom game. Champions have always got things they look back on it and say, "Oh, we rode our luck a little bit there." But at the end of the day, I do think in that West Brom game, had Zach Dickey have equalised just before half time, I think there was more goals for Leeds in that game anyway, and they would have gone out and just scored whatever they needed to do in that game. And then the Newcastle one, again, potentially could have got completely derailed and just lost their heads completely going into the last 10 minutes, but they didn't. They stayed strong and absolutely deserved champions. And I just want to go through the individuals. Ethan Fisher, for me, player of the season. Just unbelievable in the centre. He is the point of difference for Leeds. When they needed to get back into games, when they needed someone to drag them through, he was the one that did it. Lewis Harris alongside him, though, a very sort of equal participant in the defensive and going forward. I really don't think it was a 4-out. I don't think it was even close, other than in games against teams in the bottom sort of 5. But when they rotate that sort of middle, I think it was a 3 and a 1 for most games. But both Lewis Harris and Ethan were excellent in that central role when they stepped up and took it in turns to do that. Dylan Kelsall, just a magician out wide, so good. I cannot wait to see what he's going to do in an England shirt this year. And then Dan Rigby, who we already mentioned, top goal scorer. If I was being critical, I'd like to see more out of him in big games. I'd like to see more out of him when they're playing against teams like Teesside and Aspire. I think he sometimes went missing in those games, to be honest, this season. I look back at especially Greenbank in the Cup as well. I thought there were times where he sort of did get lost a little bit in games like that, which is understandable. It's his first real experience of a title race, but next season, I think that's where the improvements are in Leeds. If they can start putting in dominant performances like they've got against the bottom 16 in the in those top games, and they're going to be unstoppable. And I just wanted to finally put the spotlight on Jack Maxwell, the unsung hero, a thoroughly deserved award. I thought, he started the weekend brilliantly, scoring what should have been a hat-trick against Throssels. Didn't get on against Spire or West Brom. Comes on and literally saves their season with that goal against Newcastle. Like, it's the biggest goal in Leeds' history, bar none. It's just a huge goal. And this is one of the only criticisms I can really have of Leeds, is they then play Teesside in a dead rubber game and he doesn't get on the court. And I think that's a bit, honestly, a bit disrespectful, because the way that he played in the morning and the goal that he scored, to not even put him on in a game where it was pretty much like, there was loads of laughs and jokes, and for him not even to make an appearance after the goal he'd scored, I'd be actually fuming if I was in his position. Like, he's a better guy than I am if he didn't kick off about it, but I'd be really sort of affronted by that. I think that is a bit disrespectful. He deserved to at least be brought on in the second half of that game when, it was petering out. So that's my only gripe. That left a bit of a sour taste in my mouth, to be honest, after the weekend. I'd felt for Jack there, and there are lots of brilliant football teams up north, and if Leeds aren't going to appreciate him and appreciate how good he is, and considering how good of a talent he was last season and the amount of goals he scored, top goal scorer last season, go and play with Ollie at Newcastle, or go and be that option for Teesside, because there's a certain amount of respect that I think a player like Jack Maxwell should command, and I'm not sure that was necessarily shown to him. But I wanted to get that point across, but also without detracting from Leeds' general season, because they were absolutely outstanding. They'll be there at St George's Park for the FA Disability Cup. They'll be there in the Champions League. And it's just an incredible season, and they are thoroughly deserved winners. And the stuff I've said about Jack doesn't take away from that at all, because they fully deserve their title.
Yeah, exactly that. Something you said at the top was about mentality. We always said if Leeds got that side right, no one could stop them. and they did it much quicker than I expected. The mentality, the composure, the ability to stay calm in moments of pressure, that's what won them the title. Yes, the football is outstanding. The power they generate, the unpredictability, some of the goals they've scored is just ridiculous. But it was the psychological battles that they won. And I go back to that West Bromwich Albion game. I think it was game week 3 or 4, when West Brom had the sole objective of just getting under their skin and frustrating them and colliding and getting yellow cards. They looked unfazed, Leeds. And at that point, I said, do you know what? I think they've got it. Because nothing that West Brom threw at them seemed to damage them. And the person who exemplifies that level of maturity and development the most is Ethan Fisher. He's a very emotional player, or certainly was with his time at Newcastle. But the shift we've seen in 25-26 was incredible. And for me, it poses some incredibly interesting questions of Adam McAvoy now, because he has really put himself forward for a potential starting spot in that England side. And we understood that, or we saw that in Italy, it didn't go England's way. They're going to have to experiment and change things for Argentina. Why not do it with Ethan Fisher in the starting four?
Yeah, I think Ethan has had an incredible season, and completely deserves all the credit. There's a couple of things that I think he still needs to stamp out of his game. Do we need to be putting people into walls constantly? Like, there is an extent you don't see John Bowling putting people into walls that often. Like, it's a choice, and I think that sometimes he does that out of frustration more than anything, because I don't think it's necessarily definitely needed in that moment of the game. Obviously, I'm not going to go back on the suspension thing. I think he did admit he made a mistake there. But the one thing I would like to see from Ethan is, can he get the ball out of contact a little bit less forcefully? I do worry for him that the international sort of standard of officiating in terms of the contact that's allowed would really hamper him. Like, if we had a French referee refereeing that Newcastle game at the weekend, or pretty much any of the Aspire game, Ethan Fisher, and to be fair, a couple of other players he played against, but especially Ethan, no way he would have stayed on the court. He would have been sent off. So I've still yet to see whether Ethan can adapt, and whether Leeds can adapt as a whole to the Champions Cup. That'll be an interesting sort of dynamic to see where that big physical dominant team can still thrive in the Champions Cup, which is notoriously difficult for players that actually want to put a tackle in. And I'm not saying that this is a good thing, by the way. I'm not saying that I think it should be this way. I much prefer the way that games look in England. But it is a factor, and Ryan and I can probably attest to it more than anyone after the Club World Cup. It's a huge factor, and it's killed off players' tournaments in the past. Like, you look at Valentino Segarelli at that Club World Cup, and I just would love to see Ethan to start working in the background. How am I going to get around this as a player?
I don't disagree with any of that, but I think that is more an issue, as I've said before, for Fitfer to address than it is Ethan. Because Ethan, beyond the wall element that you've just touched on, he plays right on the edge, but the right side of the edge. And that's the distinctions between this season and last. And if the fouls and the contacts and the battles that we see in England cannot be replicated at international level, that's more for the match officials across the world to address, because aggression is at the forefront of his success.
Yeah, unfortunately, I just don't see it happening on that international scale, because we've been talking about this for 2 years, ever since the Champions Cup. That was bad, and then the Club World Cup was, but then it was exactly the same in the Euros as well. I think the contact threshold was really low compared to what it's like in England. So don't know if I don't know if we're, of course, we'd rather that the game look the way we want it to, and look the way that we think we've got it nailed on. But while those changes haven't happened, and I don't know if they will be in place for the World Cup, but while that is still the international standard in terms of contact, I think unfortunately, the players are going to have to adapt, and unfortunately are going to have to sort of shirk challenges a little bit and be a little bit more intelligent with which kind of tackle they take, rather than the rules necessarily changing, because I don't see that being something that's done in the immediate future with the setup of FIFA.
No, I get that, but I go back to the maturity that he has developed over the last 12 months, and we're going to have to see a comparable development if and when he represents England and or Leeds on the international stage. That's something that he has to show now, because England will have that reliance on him. But I agree completely. Standout player of the season. I don't think there's a world where he doesn't pick it up. He was that good, and he was the difference. Potential shouts for Dylan Kelsall, because he was equally as effective within his part of the game. But in terms of controlling, dictating, and ultimately winning Leeds the title, Ethan is the first person you think about.
Yeah, player of the season for me. I think, just to chime in on the old England debate, I think, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he does start there, because he's put himself in that position. But I think he's that little bit of an edge coming off the bench for Adam McAvoy. You know, you go with your starting, your tried and tested combo of John and Chris, because you know what you'd get from them, and the football they're bringing into Argentina at the minute is unbelievable standard from both of them, and the best we've seen in a while. And you just have Ethan as that enforcer, that power to come off the bench when teams are potentially losing concentration in late on in games.
I go back to what I said earlier. He's not Chris's replacement. He's John's. He doesn't go in as that second pivot. He is the central creator. That is where his best football was played this season. And I know there was somewhat of a hybrid system, which saw Lewis venture forward sometimes, Ethan on others. But there was a difference depending on who played there. So this, for me, I'd be intrigued to get Adam McAvoy's thoughts, because whereas we always said Ethan was the heir to Chris's throne, I don't think that at all now. I think he's now Tyler Reeves' biggest competitor for John Bolden's shirt in the centre.
It's a headache that I don't envy Adam McAvoy having, but it's a nice one to have. I think we'll hopefully see some of that in Argentina. I think before we wrap up on Leeds, I think it would be nice to say it was a nice touch having Jack Britton's number on the sideline for the final game, and in the photos at the end of celebrations.
Yeah, very much. I'm sure he would have been incredibly proud of what the squad achieved. Just to wrap up on some of the other numbers, to echo Charlie's points, Dan Rigby, 20 goals, 17 assists, an unbelievable return, more than doubling his goal output from last season. There is a question of his level of performances in the big games, and something when they've got the title of champions on their back that people will be looking to dethrone them in 26, 27. So he will be under a magnifying glass. And if he raises to the level, then again, it poses questions of Adam McAvoy and England's selection. Dylan Kelsall was sensational. Absolutely sensational. The cleanest ball striker in the division, 14 goals, 20 assists, leading from the front as captain. And that, I know that's something that influenced his move to Leeds in the first place, having that armband and being able to dictate things from the court. So congratulations to him. Jack Maxwell, 14 goals despite reduced minutes. What a contribution. That Newcastle goal alone defines his season, and he also reaches 50 Premiership goals for Leeds, adding to his tally from Northern Thunder, and on Jack Maxwell, he does deserve so much credit. Probably the unluckiest player in the division in that sense, that he arguably lines up in the starting four of almost every other side in the Premiership. And yet here he's competed in what is arguably the strongest starting four we've ever seen. But what separates him and what I'm so proud of is his mentality. Despite that Teesside game, which you've referenced, Charlie, there was no frustration. Across the season, there was no drop in level. It was just readiness. And every time he was called upon, he delivered. And that's why Leeds have won the league, because it wasn't just about having the best starting four. And this is when I spoke about Greenbank earlier. It's about having players like Jack Maxwell who can come into the biggest moments of the season and decide them. So it's right that he got the unsung hero of the weekend. I think we would unanimously agree if there was an unsung hero of the season, he would be top of that list, because ultimately the title is theirs because of him. Lastly, Warren Kelsall, Russ Rigby, a huge congratulations to both of them. They will without question be in with a shout of coaches of the season, and Warren Kelsall becomes one of the first coaches to win both the Championship and the Premiership, and that is only if you include Brad Bates as one of the Aspire coaches for 22-23. But that, gentlemen, as we are just shy of 4 hours, concludes our 12-team division and the 25-26 Slater and Gordon Premiership. It is a huge congratulations once again to Leeds, deserved champions, and a side that set the standard across the campaign. Voting for the end of season awards is now open, so make sure you have your say and recognise the standout performers across 25-26. All attention now turns to Derby. Finals day is just around the corner. If you haven't got your tickets, please do so, as we see the John Good Group WFA Cup and Vars conclude on the same day under one roof. We will both see you there. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Been a pleasure. Cheers, Ryan.